Good morning. Our purpose has been to begin the substance of our program by 8:15, and I'm really not capable of 8 minutes of remarks, so we are in very good shape this morning. My name is Joseph Kearney, and it is a great privilege for me as Dean of Marquette University Law School to welcome you to today's conference. It is a return to the Chicago Megacity. To be sure, in a sense, we never left it, as this is the shorthand phrase for the geographic region beginning some 10 miles north of here in Ozaukee County, stretching a bit west, but mostly south into Chicago and its Illinois surroundings, and extending east around the bottom of the lake into Indiana. 6 counties in Wisconsin, 10 in Illinois, and 5 in Indiana, with more than 11 million residents and immense economic activity and potential. This region was the subject of a substantial report released in 2012 by the Paris-based Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD. The region also formed the basis for a conference in July 2012, so almost exactly 3 years ago, here in Eckstein Hall, a joint project of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and Marquette Law School, underwritten by our Sheldon B. Lubar Fund for Public Policy Research. Milwaukee's Future in the Chicago Megacity, as we titled it. We have stayed with the topic in the time since, particularly in a special issue of the Marquette Lawyer magazine that we issued in 2013, and this prompted attention from, among others, Judge Richard D. Cudahy. Like Shel Lubar, a longtime resident of Milwaukee and friend of Marquette University Law School, and more specifically from the Patrick and Anna M. Cudahy Fund. The Cudahy Fund made a generous gift to support further study of the topic. We were and are glad of the support, for with the extraordinary resource of the Marquette Law School Poll, it is not too much to say that we are uniquely well positioned to explore public attitudes in the Chicago megacity and to convene a conversation about them. Who are we and what are the possibilities, as part of our conference title says. We are releasing the results of that poll this morning in the first session, which consists of what those familiar with the Marquette Law School Poll would expect. That's Mike Goucher, Distinguished Fellow in Law and Public Policy, closer to me, and he will be in conversation with Charles Franklin, Professor of Law and Public Policy and Director of the Marquette Law School Poll. That session will take us to 9:30 a.m. After a short break, we will turn to reactions. Mike will serve as the interlocutor for the second session as well, as reflected on your list, and will introduce the panelists then. And Dave Haynes, editorial page editor of the Journal-Sentinel, will do the same for the third panel. The second panel lasts until a few minutes before 11 a.m. The break then will be very short, we hope, as we start up again at 11 a.m. In all events, we will be finished no later than 12:15 p.m. I want to say a very few thank yous as I wrap up and the first session begins. One is to Shel Lubar, who will be joining us this morning, for his confidence in Marquette Law School and, more specifically, our ability to direct and convene substantial inquiries into public policy matters, and his creation a number of years ago of the Lubar Fund to support us in this effort. Another is to Judge Cudahy, who cannot be with us this morning, for his similar confidence and support. Shel Lubar and Richard Cudahy, these are great men of Milwaukee, even if since being appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit more than 3.5 decades ago, Judge Cudahy has made his home somewhat farther south in the Chicago megacity. Shel, by contrast, came back to his hometown after government service in Washington, D.C. some 40 years ago, and we are all fortunate for the continuing interest in this city of both individuals. A third thank you is to Dave Haynes of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. He was a lead partner 3 years ago when we first turned to the megacity, and has been on a number of things from then to now, including this conference. I'm always grateful not only for Dave's leadership, but also for his sound judgment and his interest in participating in any way that would be helpful. And although Marty Kaiser is no longer the editor of the Journal Sentinel, he too has been a central player in our very small group planning this conference and is here this morning. So I'm very grateful to Marty as well. Please join me in thanking these individuals whom I have mentioned as I hand it over to Mike and Charles.
Thanks to Dean Kearney, and good morning to all of you. Thanks for being with us today. We're delighted that you could join us here at the law school as we revisit the subject of the Chicago Megacity. Today we're talking about public attitudes in the Chicago Megacity. Who are we and what are the possibilities? And we're going to begin with the who are we part of the equation here. Joining me, as he always does when we release results of the Marquette Law School Poll, is Professor Charles Franklin, the director of the Law School Poll. And what we're going to be doing for about the next hour and 15 minutes is walking you through a fair number of the results in the poll. The entire poll will be available online. You'll be able to look at all of the questions. But we're going to focus on what we think are some of the more relevant questions for this larger discussion about the Chicago Megacity. Charles, great to be with you again. You can watch the screens to your left and right to see the graphs and slides that Charles will be presenting. But we wanted to begin with a little background perspective. Why are we doing this, and when did we do this? Let's begin there.
Okay. Well, let's start with the why. It's relatively easy to get demographic information about the region. The Census Bureau provides us a lot of that, business information a lot. The OECD report was filled with facts and figures about the area. But what was lacking in that report and in general is understand the attitudes of the people that live here, because knowing demographic characteristics will take you so far, but it won't answer the question of whether we could get along or whether we really don't like those people across the state line. So there's really no substitute but asking people how they feel about these issues. The other is this is an area where there's not a whole lot of polling, but more importantly, there's almost no cross-border polling. So we poll Wisconsin. We don't typically poll Illinois. This is actually, it's the Marquette Law School poll. This is the first time we've done a poll that wasn't 100% Wisconsin sample. And each of the individual states. Illinois has some polling. Indiana has some polling. But they typically don't poll both Indiana and Illinois or Indiana and Wisconsin. So as far as I know, we are unique now at having crossed those, not just one state line, but two state lines, and covering all three areas. The other is treating the region as a geographic entity that we would care about. Why these 21 counties? Well, it's clear that what unites us is the Chicago Megacity. It's that force of the economy that stretches through all this region. I've stolen shamelessly from John Gerda in his description that if you flew over at 30,000 feet at night, you just see a uniform glow of lights down there. You really wouldn't be able to tell where one state ended and the other began. And that is the underlying unity of the region that we live, act, do business, grow up, grow old in this context. So that's the why look at it this way is because it's really understudied that way.
And a lot of this conversation began 3 years ago when the OECD report, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, this is a European-based, highly respected organization, did this review of the tri-state area. And Charles, we should say very briefly, one of the conclusions of that report was that there needed to be greater regional cooperation in order to further the economic prospects of the region.
One of the themes of the OECD report is that there's too much zero-sum competition between units of government so that collective benefits that could be achieved through some cooperation are sadly undersupplied. Now, you might immediately think governor-to-governor conflict, but it's also city-to-city and village-to-village. I think to me, the single most staggering number from the report was that in these 21 counties, there are over 1,700 governments. By comparison, in the Toronto area, which is about the same population, there are 28. Not 2,800, 28. And so it doesn't necessarily mean 28 is better in some normative sense than 1,700, right? If we really like localism, we want to tailor our government to our particular situations, maybe 1,700 is the right number. But if we'd like to do things sort of cooperatively, if nothing else, and even with the best goodwill possible, coordination among 1,700 units is a lot harder than coordination among 28, right? And so that was one of the driving things of the OECD report. But I thought what it, public opinion nerd, what it left out was the question of whether the people would like to see more cooperation or not. Because if we don't have much cooperation, and that's exactly what the public likes, then government leaders are being responsive to what their citizens want, right? And so, again, the only way to answer that is not through aggregate economic statistics, but by asking people.
So we asked people in 21 counties in 3 states. How many people, Charles? And give people some sense of the methodology here. Are we using cell phones? What are we doing?
Yeah, and it's slightly more complicated than our usual, so let me go into it. In total, we interviewed 1,872 people across the 21 counties. We interviewed by both landline and cell phone. It's about 45% cell phone and about 55% landline, which is in the right ballpark for the split between those two in terms of what we know about usage. What we did that was unusual, though, was we designed it to get about equal-sized samples between Wisconsin and Illinois and Indiana, so that each of the 3 states was equally represented, so we'd have the same precision in understanding opinion in each. So the design was to take about 600 in each of the 3 states in these counties that are part of the region. Somewhat amusingly to me, in Wisconsin, we ended up with 660 respondents because people here were a little more willing to do the interview. Good Wisconsin people. But we had 600 in, I have the number here, 600 in Illinois, 612 in Indiana, and we ended up with 660 in Wisconsin. Now, the one little caveat here is we're going to focus in everything that I talk about a comparison of each of the 3 states, one with the other. So within each state, there's a margin of error. And for Illinois, that's 5.8 percentage points, plus or minus. It's 5.2 in Indiana, and it's 5.1 in Wisconsin. So call it roughly a little over 5 percentage points for each of the 3 states. If we wanted to talk about the region as a whole, then we'd want to reweight the data for the bigger population that's in Illinois, right? Because clearly Illinois' 10 counties that we include there have more people in them. Still, you're going to see, not to give too much away, the differences among the states are pretty modest. So I think you come away with a good impression of regional opinion on the whole just by looking at the 3 states, because if we don't differ much from each other, then the region as a whole doesn't differ much.
Well, let's get to the numbers, get to the results of the poll. And Charles, we should say the poll was done this summer. So
I'm sorry.
Is fresh.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We did the interviews June 15th through 22nd. Normally, of course, we don't hold poll results for this long, but as an extra added bonus, starting later today, you can download the full 69-page report. So
good. You should download it. You should.
It's fantastic.
It is good.
But the point here is, unlike our usual Wisconsin polls where they're topical and there's an immediate need to get those results out, here we're talking about issues that are not really likely to change very rapidly over time, certainly not over a little bit of time. And, we needed a little extra time to write the report.
There are no questions about Scott Walker's presidential prospects in this poll.
I'm sorry, not a single horse race question. So.
No horse race this time.
Now,
anyhow, let's begin with this notion of cooperation and just what people want from their political leaders, Charles. Do they want them to cooperate with other political leaders? Do they want them to set out on their own and carve out their own path and be as competitive as possible? Let's begin with that.
Yeah. Certainly through their behavior, you often hear governors talk about how my state's better than your state. There are billboards at the Illinois-Indiana border saying, move your business to Indiana. So those of us from Wisconsin may think that's unique to us. It's absolutely not unique to us. Governor Perry from Texas, before he was running for president, would go around the country talking about how great job creation was in Texas and how attractive it is to move your business here. So there's nothing unusual or unique about our three governors competing with one another on this issue. But there is a question of whether that's what the public wants, because on the one hand, a priori, you could say, well, of course I want a governor who's fighting for my state and trying to stimulate business growth here. On the other, you might imagine that people don't see zero-sum fights here, but see a divisible set of benefits. So we asked the question, and here it is. Would you rather see elected officials work together on common problems, or would you rather see each of them look out for their own state first? And what we see is a substantial majority, over 70% in Illinois and Indiana, and 61% in Wisconsin, that say they would rather see cooperation among the governors or among elected officials rather than only looking out for their own state. Now, this wasn't a complete surprise. Dean Kearney mentioned that we held a conference 3 years ago on this topic. And for that one, we had done a survey that included southeastern Wisconsin and asked this exact question. But we didn't have it for Illinois or Indiana. Back then, 3 years ago, we got almost the same results, just over 60% in Wisconsin saying they'd like to see cooperation, a minority down in the 30s saying they'd rather see elected officials look out for home first.
Do we spend time worrying about others in this region, Charles, or are we very parochial? I mean, this is something that you hear a lot about, that we're only concerned about what happens in our immediate vicinity.
I think I wrote this question thinking I knew what the answer was, so it's always best when you get surprised. So the question is, when you get right down to it, do you agree or disagree? I really only care about how well off the place I live is, and really don't think about regional, how well the region is doing. I think it's pretty reasonable to say I care about my neighborhood or my town, and honestly, I don't get up every morning worrying about what's happening in other cities or other states. But in fact, we find most people disagree with that claim. Upwards of 60 to 70% say they disagree or disagree strongly with the notion that really they only care about their local situation. So here, too, where I think it would actually be fairly reasonable to confess that, you know, when you get right down to it, I care about my place. A lot of people disagree with that. In fact, a large number disagree with it. And again, notice how similar it is across the three states. I want to highlight that for just a second, because this is a fairly important point for the entire day and the entire conference. You might have thought that Illinois and Indiana and Wisconsin would differ from one another on things that really matter, like the Packers versus the Bears. And I wanted to ask that question, but people thought they already knew the answer, so I didn't ask it. So, of course, there are things that we are deeply divided on between our states. But what you will see throughout this report and throughout the presentation today is how modest those differences really are. So in the previous slide, for example, you saw about over 70% in Illinois and Indiana wanted cooperation. It was a little bit over 60% in Wisconsin that wanted cooperation. So that's a little bit lower here, and it happens to be statistically significant. But the qualitative point that a substantial majority in all three states want cooperation is really what you should take away from that slide and this one, that the differences between the states as states are, I think, stunningly small throughout virtually every one of our results. There are some tendencies, like I just highlighted for Wisconsin versus the other two states, but they're tendencies, they're not major things. So what does that mean the issue of regional cooperation really has to face? It's less state versus state dramatic differences. What it really is the differences within all of the states. Who within the state wants to urge cooperation? Who within the state wants to go our own way? Those political divisions are the things that make regional cooperation harder, but it's not because Illinois and Wisconsin differ dramatically from each other. It's that within our states we differ among ourselves on what we think the best courses of policy are. And so, and those differences are essentially the same across the three states, again, with some small differences and variations. So occasionally as we go through here, I will point out areas of substantial disagreement, but those are differences of disagreement that come within the states, not because you live in Indiana or live in Illinois.
Charles, there's certainly no doubt Chicago in the megacity is the big dog, but I guess one of the questions we were interested in knowing is whether people, for example, in Indiana or Wisconsin, or even people in Illinois for that matter, thought there was benefit of being in close proximity. Could Chicago actually help the economic fortunes of these other regions, or does it, in essence, act as a drain? Does it take businesses and jobs away from Wisconsin and Indiana?
Absolutely. And so here again, your a priori notion would be, well, there's a plausible case that it's the great threat to us because we talk about the brain drain, we talk about young people getting educated in one state and then moving to the big city. How are you going to keep them down on the farm when they've seen the city? Turns out, overwhelmingly, people in all three states, maybe not so surprisingly Illinois, but in the other two states, Indiana and Wisconsin, overwhelming majorities see Chicago as a benefit, that this is an opportunity for us to benefit from having such a large metropolis, such a large economic center at our back door, relatively speaking, rather than see it as a threat to attract workers away from us.
One of the things that we asked about 3 years ago in the poll that we did of Wisconsin residents, southeast Wisconsin residents, was whether or not people there felt that the private sector, if you were going to embark upon this notion of greater regional cooperation, would it be the private sector that led the way? And we revisited that question again this time.
Yeah. And on this, people really think the private sector is going to do this. Sorry. You don't need to move, but I just need to squint. I should have made that in a bigger font, shouldn't I? It will be the private sector that makes this cooperation happen. And again, we did ask this question 3 years ago and got almost the same results in southeastern Wisconsin. A question here is this because normatively people think that it should be the private sector that leads on these questions, or whether it's a view of government as unable to create collective benefits, unable to cooperate. We didn't probe into that question. But the stability of the answers with well over 60% in our 2012 survey and now repeated here and repeated in all three states certainly shows that the public is by and large here not looking to government to be the leading actor on this. Of course, that also brings with it a bit of a problem. There's more coordination costs in the private sector among large numbers of actors than there could be if we had 3 chief executives sit down in government and come to some agreement. So there are definitely problems though you notice I highlighted the 3 chief executives and not the however many hundred members of the legislatures that would be involved. So maybe there are real barriers to that in the government sector as well. Let me just throw out here, because in all of these that we've been talking about, it probably won't surprise you that frequently party and political ideology structure these attitudes. The same kind of partisan lines we see in lots of areas carry over to here. There are some occasional differences that are demographically based. African Americans are a little more likely to see Chicago as an economic threat, for example. But the structuring of these broad attitudes is generally reflective of the structuring of partisan and ideological political conflict as well, with conservatives and Republicans more suspicious of cooperation, with Democrats and liberals saying they're more welcoming of it. For most of these, there are some exceptions, but I'm not going to try and give you every single exception.
So we were wondering, practically speaking, what would regional cooperation look like? And one thing we asked about, Charles, and I think the response was pretty interesting, was licensing. And this is something that I think has had a fair amount of discussion, and our results were, I think, enlightening.
Yeah, so this is a question about whether licenses for a wide variety of professions and trades, which are currently conducted usually at the state level, though in some cases actually at lower levels of government, things like plumbers and cosmetologists that need to be licensed separately in each location, each state. So we're not just talking about doctors and lawyers, we're talking about really to a naive academic like me, a surprisingly broad range of professions that need to get a state license. And so the economic issue here, which is talked about in a number of circles, is the barriers that put on labor to move from place to place. If you could move across the border, but doing so would mean you would have to go through the whole licensing process over for your trade, then that might make you a little less likely to be mobile and do that. And so you can think about that as something that limits individuals' ability to sell their labor in an efficient way, and the barriers that resurrects. Now, of course, the flip side of that is, if I'm hiring a plumber in Wisconsin, I might be a little dubious if they had a Florida plumbing license and had never heard of freezing water, right? So there's certainly a flip side to this, that local conditions may need different kind of regulation. So what do people think about this? I think I skipped one. Again, pretty substantially, 64 and 62 in Illinois and Indiana and 54 in Wisconsin, say a single license that would be good throughout the region would be better here. I want to highlight this for a second because this is a case where collective benefits are pretty apparent. Who loses if we have a collective license? It's a little hard to see where the losses would be, but individuals here, and reflected by their answers, see that there's a real potential for gains, and they support that, without particularly thinking that this would favor Indiana more than it would favor Illinois, for example. So we see large support here. We'll see if that holds up as we go forward.
Another possibility, Charles, and this is regional cooperation on transportation needs. In other words, should we put money into a common fund in the region and use that to fund our transportation needs?
And there are two keys here. One is transportation, but the other is common fund, with the implication that we're going to take some of our state tax money and put it in a pool with those other people, whoever the other people are, depending on where you live. Would you be willing to do that? And perhaps surprisingly, right around 60% in all three states say they would be willing to do that. Now, let's be careful. The way we worded it was a common fund for coordinating and planning for airports and roads and Lake Michigan ports and so on. You know, and there's a fairly obvious thing that if you come up to the border between two states, it'd be really nice if the highways met like this rather than met like this, right? So there is certainly some level of coordination and planning that's really obvious in this area. But even with the addition of putting money into a common fund, we still get pretty substantial support on this.
This spirit of cooperation, though, only goes so far. And one of the keys in the OECD report was this notion that there was this competition back and forth between states in the war and for big companies with lots of jobs. So we asked a question that gets at that.
What about companies? What about attracting business? This is, I alluded to the signs at the Illinois-Indiana border. Wisconsin's open for business. Illinois has an incredible track record of taking or attracting large corporations to move their headquarters, say from Milwaukee to Chicago, or Seattle to Chicago, as the case may be. So this is a very real question. Look at support disappear here. It doesn't go completely away, but now majorities in all three states oppose having a common fund for the purpose of attracting large companies to move to their region. What's different between this and transportation? Well, having the roads meet instead of not meet is a pretty good reason for coordinating on transportation. On licensing, where we saw a big gain, there's no reason to think that what I gain is what you lose. But there is some implicit or even explicit trade-offs when we're talking about location of corporate headquarters or location of a large Amazon distribution plant, for example. So in these kinds of examples, I think, and you see it here, voters are more skeptical that it's possible to share resources and effort when, at least from the point of view of location of businesses, this is a relatively indivisible good, right? You don't put part of the headquarters in downtown Chicago and part of it in Gary and part of it in Milwaukee. And so you see the support for cooperation go down here in a place where probably it's fairly sensible for it to go down.
Another area where you see possible competition amongst the states, and there are reasons for it according to these results, is when you look at the issue of taxes, especially for people who live near the borders of these states.
Sorry, I think the next one is tourism. Sorry, for me, in my order anyway. Sorry, I just love to stick in extra slides on Mike, you know, because he doesn't think we need to talk about every single topic, but he's clearly wrong on this. Thank you. Tip your waitress. Tourism is the other. It's also indivisible, and look at here, we really don't want to share tourism advertising and planning. Why? Well, you're going to go spend your money in Door County or you're going to spend it in downtown Chicago. It's pretty unlikely you're spending that money equally across these places. So here again, this breaks down. Now,
you want to talk about taxes?
Yeah, let's talk about taxes, Mike. That's a great idea. This, again, is an area where political leadership talks a great deal about it. Much of that rhetoric is about lower taxes. We want you here where we provide, you know, lower income or property or sales taxes. But there is an argument on the other side as well about services. Do you want to go to this very low tax, but low service community, or would you rather be where the government, the state, is making investments? So it's not entirely a one-sided question. But we did ask the question of how willing people would be to move based on tax advantages. Now, the fact is that at the aggregate level, mobility, geographic mobility, has declined dramatically over the last 50 years or so. If you're of a certain age, like I am, You think of the mass mobility that we saw in the 50s and 60s as people moved all over the country. That really is not the case anymore. There's much less mobility. And in fact, we see far less interstate relocations. Most of the movement is within the same state and even within the same county. So we're really not seeing the geographic mobility that we used to see. So the way we phrased this question was not, would you move to California if they had lower taxes, or maybe Texas is the better example of that. But instead, if your job was close to the border between two states, would you move to the state with the lower property and income taxes? A lot of people are very willing, say they're very willing to do this. Now, undoubtedly, this overstates the actual mobility simply because it doesn't involve questions of can you sell your house, are your kids willing to leave their friends, and all of those other things that inhibit mobility. But it certainly does show a willingness on the part of respondents here to vote with their feet for competitive government policies that would claim or actually provide different benefits if you live 10 miles further north or 8 miles further east than what you have if you stay where you are. Now, it's not very practical for people to commute from Michigan City to Milwaukee every day, so that kind of movement is not so plausible. But if you live just south of the border and your job is within 10 miles either side of the border, seems a more reasonable thing, and a lot of people are willing to do that. So to recap, we saw this substantial support for cooperation earlier among leaders on transportation, on licensing. As we've come to more tangible and more directly competitive and indivisible benefits on tourism and business location and on tax benefits, we see people throughout the region say those differences matter to them and they would react to the competition between them.
Let's spend some time on workforce and talent issues in this region, Charles. And I think we want to begin by talking about education levels in the Chicago megacity. What's the most education our respondents have achieved?
Right.
And because I think that's a good starting point for this part of the conversation.
Yeah. This also sets the groundwork for workforce and work-life experiences. How qualified are people? But it sets the groundwork for our region in its attractiveness to various business interests for whether we have a workforce that people want to come to. The OECD report pointed out that as a region, we're actually better educated than the country as a whole. We have more people with bachelor degrees or higher. We have slightly fewer with high school or less. And so the region as a whole has not a gigantic advantage on education, but it actually has a bit of an advantage. If you break it down by the states in our 21 counties, Illinois is a bit more advantaged on this at both the high end and a little less on the low end. Wisconsin is very close to the national numbers, about 2% better at the high end of education, about 2% less, smaller number of people at high school or less. And then the northwestern part of Indiana has considerably higher percentages with just a high school education and fewer with college. If you just break this out here, you see that it's about 29% with high school or less in Illinois, but it's about 50% in northwestern Indiana, and it's about 40% in Wisconsin. It's 42% nationally are at that level of high school or less. And at the opposite end, you see Illinois gets up into the, well into the 30s with a BA or higher, Wisconsin into the 20s, 28, and northwestern Indiana, 18. So there are some discrepancies within the region, with Illinois counties outperforming the country by a noticeable margin, not gigantic, but a noticeable margin. Wisconsin by a very slight margin, and Indiana facing more challenges with a higher percentage in the region that have only a high school diploma.
How many people, Charles, say they've had technical training after high school?
This is an important topic. We hear a lot about technical schools. Let me just show you the result and then wax on about it a minute. About a third or more say they've had some post-high school technical training. That's actually quite a number, and I was sort of surprised at this, so let me delve into it slightly, and we'll pull out some details in a minute as well. The usual census and other data ask people, what is the highest level of schooling you completed? And so you say, well, 11th grade, I finished high school but nothing else. I finished high school and I had some technical school. I had some college. I got an AA, an associate's degree. I got a BA. I got something beyond a BA. When you do that, and in our data, if I go back one, oh, it's not on that slide. In our data, about 7% say they had technical training when you ask what's the highest level of schooling you had. But when you ask it this way, it comes up to more like 33, 34, or in Wisconsin, 37%. The difference is some of these people also have an associate's degree. And so on the first question, they'll say, oh, I have an associate's degree, or I have some college, which in the usual coding rules would be higher than higher education than a technical. Even some people with a bachelor's, a smaller number, but there are some with a bachelor's degree that also say they have some kind of technical training. We're going to delve in a minute into where that technical training comes from and what the consequences of it are. But I think it's really important right off the bat, at least certainly the way I came to these data, expecting something in the ballpark of 7 to 10% with technical training, to see that it's really about 3 times that much. And it's concentrated especially among people with high school diplomas but not college. Still a lot of people with some college but not a degree. And then it tails off, but there's still some with technical training at the AA and BA level.
So that's what people have. What do they think you need in today's world in terms of education to have a good paying job?
The answer is more. Surprise, surprise. Here's the aspiration level. How much do you think a person needs to get and keep a good paying job is the way we phrase this. And let me summarize because it's a complicated set of numbers there. The main takeaway is if you compare the first 2 lines, saying people can get along with less than high school or high school, all 3 of those state numbers across the top are significantly smaller than the percentage of people in those states who actually have a high school diploma or less. So you're seeing people aspire to something greater than where they sit. Same thing if you look at the upper end, more people are saying college or beyond college than actually have those degrees. But having said that, I think a really important point is how large let's see if my laser is working here, how large the combination of technical training or 2-year community college is. We're up in the high 30s, up in the 50s, and up in the, help me, 50s again. So it's easy to simplify this and say the public all thinks you need to get an MBA to be successful. That's not at all what the public is saying. They're saying you can't get by with the sort of lower degrees that in 50 years ago were plenty for a good career. But they're also not saying you need to max out the education. There's really quite a substantial percentage that see technical training or a 2-year degree as something that's effective for them. One quick point about differences here. is this is a case where African Americans and Hispanics, who are on average lower in education in their own level of schooling, are higher than others in their aspirations for training. And so, if you will, a generational difference there of what folks were able to do in their circumstances versus now what do they look as needed for success. You see African Americans and Latinos particularly positive towards higher levels of education.
Let's go back to the training issue that you mentioned earlier, Charles. How many people receive, for example, training from a union?
Yeah. And this is why we get up to the 30-something% range rather than that 7%, because in addition to just asking people what their highest level of schooling was, we asked them some questions about their direct experience with other kinds of training, technical training. So what about training that you received from a union? And it's in the upper teens, 18% in Illinois, 16% in Indiana, 13% in Wisconsin. Remember, this is at a time where union membership as a percent of the labor force is down in the mid and increasingly the lower teens. And so you might not look at those numbers as terribly high, but the fact is they're very much in line with the percent of union membership in the country. And they represent something better than 15, but perhaps a shade less than 20% of the workforce that gets some direct technical training job skills from their union.
How about training from a technical school?
Which is what most people naturally think about when we say, well, did you get technical training? You think, well, you enrolled at MATC and you got technical training. Well, quite a few people do, 24, 22, 31% across the states say that they did that. Now, again, compare those numbers right there with the 7% or so that say on the education question, oh, I went to technical school. And right here on this direct answer, we're up into the 20s that have received some kind of formal, institutionalized technical training. But they don't show up on the education measure because they also got an associate's degree somewhere, or maybe they got a bachelor's degree. And so this is where we're seeing more. I told you earlier, how did we get to the 30s? Well, we got to it by combining these three measures. Did you get union training? Did you get technical school training? Or did you answer the education question by saying, I had technical training beyond high school, right? When you put those three together, and some of them overlap, a fair number of people say they had both union training and technical school, so they don't just add up. They add to something a little less than if you added them all up. But that's how we get to 33, 34, and 37% saying that they have had some technical school or some kind of technical training. And we'll say a little more about that as we go.
Employers are the other part of that, too. And some people who have employer offered.
That's right. So we hear a lot about whether companies are adequately investing in their workers or whether they are pushing that onto the state, onto the public, saying, you know, we can't hire people because you're not preparing people, but we look to the state to increase its spending. That's a fairly common kind of argument against this notion. So we just asked people, did your current or previous employer, for people that have left the workforce, so retirees are part of our data, so we're asking about that. Did your current or previous employer offer training that would improve your skills and allow you to move up to a better job in the company? And over half say yes. Slightly less than half in Indiana, a bit more than half in both Wisconsin and Illinois. So this is also really interesting to me. I had no idea what we would find here, but it seems from our data that there are opportunities to improve your situation at work by acquiring company-offered training in skills. And one has to presume that if the company's offering the training, it's very relevant to the jobs the company cares about. So now I did not count this as part of that previous technical school training because we just asked, did your company offer it? We didn't ask, did you take advantage of it? Did you get to move up? In 3 years, when we do the next version of this survey, maybe I'll have the gumption to add that question and probe a little more deeply. But across these three areas, your formal education and what you aspire to, your opportunities for technical training from unions, from technical schools, and now on-the-job training. I think it's striking to see that cumulatively a little over a third take advantage of that kind of training, and about half, at least in principle, have the opportunity to take advantage of it at work.
This next question was interesting, Charles. It deals with how much job training and work ethic determine the economic fortunes of a region. It kind of gets at an interesting issue of how we view ourselves. Yep. What determines our fate?
Absolutely. Are we simply pawns of giant corporations moving around, or does the workforce matter? Well, lo and behold, people overwhelmingly say the workforce matters a lot. It's up near 50% at least in that first green bar in each of these, with another sizable chunk saying a good bit. And then there's a minority of you that says, no, really the workforce doesn't matter much for economic growth.
Found this next one interesting because there's a lot of debate about the role of government in creating jobs. That's a lot of back and forth in the political arena. We asked a question that gets at that.
Yep, and here's your comparison. Many fewer think that government, through incentives and regulatory changes, can similarly stimulate economic growth. So this doesn't mean that there's no belief that, and particularly state government, I should qualify it. We specifically said state government, not just government, which would include the federal level. And so there is a majority that say either a great deal or some, but it's a far smaller majority that would stress the workforce differences here. These questions are of interest to me as well in that you could imagine different political universes in which partisanship would go different ways on this, right? One might be a laissez-faire universe that doubts the government has much to do, but individuals are overwhelmingly dominant. Another in which it's believed that the government is responsible for doing things. In fact, we see some partisan differences on these, but it's Republicans who are less likely to believe workforce matters and more likely to believe government matters, which is not quite the laissez-faire universe that we seemingly don't live in. But in the big picture, from the point of view of respondents here, it's striking that if you will, self-reliance, or at least workforce development, is seen not just as preparing me for a job, but is seen as more important for driving long-term economic success of the region rather than government action. So, if you will, there's a double story here. One is we want you to be trained because we want you to be trained. But the other is training is the route to a better economy within the area.
This next question, I was really struck by the results in this. We asked people whether or not they had a clear plan for the kind of work that they would do. Did they have a clear plan for that? I was just amazed by that.
Not entirely. Illinois was split evenly, 49 clear plan, 49 not. But in Indiana, just 37 had a clear plan, in Wisconsin, 47. And we asked this as, did you enter the workforce with a clear plan of the kind of work you would do? Or did you look for whatever job was available at the time? So there are at least a couple of things to recognize here. If you enter the workforce in a difficult economic time or in a difficult economic region where jobs are scarce, then it's hardly a shock if more people would say they took whatever job was available. But it's also hard to look at these data, and the analysis, the more detailed analysis, confirms that a lot of this is because who knew this? 17-year-olds don't know entirely what they want to do with their lives. Duh, gosh, what an insight. But where you especially see people without a plan are people with lower levels of educational achievement. Where you see more planning are people that get college degrees and advanced degrees. Well, that's hardly a shock either. It takes a certain amount of planning to get those advanced degrees, though if you listen to some talk about the job market, you'd think a college degree wasn't enough. In fact, it's a huge advantage economically over those without a college degree, no matter what you hear about baristas with master's degrees. But what is so striking here is the relationship between this having a clear plan and people getting technical training. What we see throughout the data, hopefully this is the right place to sum this up. I'm blanking on the next slide. What we see so clearly through these data are that if you have a lower level of academic training, you are much more likely to go get technical training. If you entered the workforce without a clear plan for what you would do, you are more likely to acquire technical training. So the story that I think these data paint very clearly is a division in the workforce, the citizenry, between those that, for whatever reason, enter their work lives at an educational disadvantage, meaning they have a high school or less for formal education, they don't have a clear plan for what they're going to do, and they suffer in that job market. But what we see overwhelmingly is those are exactly the people that are then subsequently likely to acquire technical training. And the percentages you saw earlier, over a third that get that technical training, are finding ways to supplement an academic formal education with the kind of training that's much more job relevant and much more likely to help them find a career, be able to compete in a career, than if they simply had a high school diploma and never acquired anything else. So this combination of how much planning did you have, how much education did you have, but now you're 25 and, you know, playing Xbox all day is really not what it used to be. My daughter's 15, so I'm full of fears about the future on this.
Does she have a clear plan?
No, but she does have an Xbox. If you want your nails or hair done, though, she's really good at that. But what you see people doing is compensating a little bit later in life and making their opportunities a little bit greater. And we see in our data that if you have a tech degree or tech training, you're more likely to be employed, for example, than if you have exactly the same characteristics and you don't have that training. So I think this combination of recognizing the reality of how people enter the workforce and leave formal education, but then have some opportunities to acquire the technical training, to me is something that stands out far more in our data than I anticipated it would going into the project.
Charles, according to our respondents, how hard was it, how difficult was it to find a job in the region?
Here it's a very mixed pattern. If you want to be the optimist, look at the bottom two rows and you'll see over 50%, well over 50%, saying it's either easy or extremely easy to find employment. So that's not an image of a labor force that's struggling with work. But if you look at the first row, you find the bifurcation here of the much gloomier side. About 10% in each of the three states saying that finding employment has been extremely hard for them. And then an additional group in the high 20s, low 30s that say work has been difficult, though not extremely so. As you would expect from the bifurcation we see in education as well. And you wouldn't be surprised that level of formal education plays a role in this, is that people who have the advantages of advanced education do pretty well on this score, but it's not the case for a significant fraction of our population, that 10% that find work really hard to get. And you know, how that works then, what you do about that is one of the deep policy problems that we face. To my disappointment, having technical education did not make people say it was easier for them to find jobs. So as all of these things I've been saying positively about technical training, you might expect it to show up here. It actually does not.
So are people generally satisfied with their careers, their work, their lives?
Generally so. Not super thrilled, that's the green bar, but the purple bar, which is satisfied, is by far the highest category. Put the two together. The vast majority of people are satisfied with their work lives. But again, the persistent, here it's 5%, but it's another 11 to 14% in the next dissatisfied category. So something under 20% find their work lives unsatisfying. A smaller percentage in single digits are just very dissatisfied with their work lives. So I'd say this is generally a fairly positive situation, but not without some difficulties, some significant difficulties. I would say that also in surveys and studies of satisfaction across a lot of domains of life, family, and so on, as well as work, people tend to say they're satisfied in a pretty high degree. Still, we take them at their word here.
I've got about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to move into my rapid-fire part of the program. And I want to begin by talking about sort of the entrepreneurial spirit of this region and whether or not people had actually started their own company or defined themselves as self-employed. What did we find there?
Yeah. Entrepreneurship is certainly something that we talk a lot about. I think probably every governor in America, regardless of party, talks about small business as important for being the place where most jobs are created and so on. The Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City produces rankings of entrepreneurial activity across states and more recently, in fact, just last month, metro areas. Of 39 metro areas in the country, Milwaukee ranked 39th last, and Chicago ranked 21st. The Kauffman study didn't include Northwest Indiana except the part that's in the Chicago metro area, so I don't have a comparison for them. So Chicago 21st out of 39 is just a shade below the median, and Wisconsin or Milwaukee towards the bottom. When we look at the state rankings on the Kauffman report, we get a similar result with Wisconsin, I think, dead 50th on the state basis, Illinois being just about the middle, and Indiana a little closer to Wisconsin. So on those grounds, which are based on data about people owning a business, starting a business, a couple of other indicators based more on aggregate data, the Kauffman Foundation paints a picture of the region that is, as a region, at best below average, and as particular areas within the region, a bit below average, if not downright low. So we took a measure based on one that they use, which I want to be clear, our measure is not identical to theirs, but it draws on one of the questions that they use in their measure. And that is, have you ever owned have you started your own business or owned a store or a company, or have you ever been self-employed? And that's the Kauffman definition of entrepreneurs. So for us, what we find is a little under a third in the area say that they have at some point engaged in this activity. Now, this is a long-term view, right? Because have you ever started a business, have you ever been self-employed, has a long-term frame. So, but that's the same kind of question the Kaufman folks asked. So about a third, let's call it, or shade less, have engaged at some point in this kind of entrepreneurial activity.
We gave people an option if they were just starting out in the business world today. And this kind of gets at that spirit question. Are you willing to take a little bit less now to reap big rewards later?
Yeah, if you were in your 20s or 30s, how willing would you be to take a job with a new startup company if you had a chance to make a large profit if the startup became successful, but you would make a low salary at first? And this is, maybe your Silicon Valley dream of moving out there. It's also a sort of rhetoric that pervades our discussion of young people coming into the cities, getting involved in startup activity, and so on. There's some willingness, but not huge. It's about the same one-third we just saw in people who've actually started businesses who say they would be very willing to do this. Another big group that say they're at least somewhat willing, and then there's very few in the bottom two categories saying, oh no, no way, no how, never do a thing like that. It wouldn't surprise you to discover that those who have started businesses say they're much more willing to do this. And the risk-taking carries over. But it looks like only about a third, about the same number who've engaged in entrepreneurship, would be very willing to take on those challenges.
So are we risk adverse? I think about my nephew's 28 who lives in the Silicon Valley, and he switches jobs every 2 or 3 years in the tech world, chasing the next best opportunity. So we ask people a question. Would you be the kind of person who would leave a job after just a couple of years to pursue another opportunity, which you consider a better opportunity, or is it better to hang on to that safe, reliable job, that stable job?
And this is, again, one of those sort of key questions. Again, if we go back a few decades, remember a period in the 70s, 80s, when real incomes were rising pretty rapidly, or the 60s is more the real point here. In the decades since the 70s, real incomes for everybody in the bottom 80% of the income distribution have been essentially flat in adjusted real earnings. There is some side debate about whether income transfer programs have actually raised the earnings a little bit. So in fairness to the economists, this will be the only time you see me care about being fair to economists. But in fairness to the economists, there is some reasonable and important debate about whether flat real wages really mean nobody's gotten any better economic situation. But the overall picture is still pretty much the same. We have not seen big wage gains over the last 20 or 30 years, except at the very highest ends of the income distribution. Well, so what could you do about that? You could stay in a job that you thought was safe and accept 0% increases over the long haul, real increases. Or, as this question puts it, you could change jobs frequently. Whenever there was a better job, take it. Okay? That would seem to be individually rational. Not many people want to do that. In fact, over two-thirds, 63, 66, and 67 across the 3 states, say they'd rather stay in a safe and secure job rather than change jobs frequently to pursue opportunities. So this is on the one hand, maybe it's understandable if you put it in the context of this broad risk-taking and entrepreneurship. A third have started a business of some kind. A third would be willing to join a startup. And now, roughly a third think it's better to change jobs frequently. Most of us don't want that kind of risk. I have to tell a quick anecdote. I was walking out of a parking structure about 2 years ago, and this young 20-something couple was walking in front of me, and I overheard their conversation because, of course, you listen in. And one of them said to the other, well, I guess we could start a business. And the other said, no way, I don't want to work that hard. There you go. And Anybody that's had a business knows how hard it is. So we see basically a lower appetite for risk-taking. Roughly a third of the region is willing to do that across a variety of ways, but that aversion, if you will, or at least reticence to take big risks also mean you give up big gains, or in the case of changing jobs frequently, you may just give up the ability to have at least a modestly rising real income, assuming, of course, that there are those opportunities out there, which there are for some, but not necessarily for everyone.
Manufacturing has played an important role in the economic fortunes of this region, and our poll suggests that we still believe in manufacturing.
We do. Can a young person have a successful career in manufacturing these days? Honestly, I expected most people to be very down on this, but in fact, over two-thirds in each state, again, say that you can. Now, I don't think that means that these folks believe that manufacturing is the same giant employer that it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But there is some optimism there. There is, of course, also a resurgence in a variety of advanced manufacturing, and I actually believe the plant is in Indiana that I'm thinking about, some reshoring of operations from overseas. But those plants tend to employ far fewer workers and use much more automation, so the potential explosion of the number of jobs may be more limited, even if the economic value that's produced is quite substantial. In any case, it certainly shows that there's not a massive souring of manufacturing as a potential career. This would be another one that 3 years from now we'd ask more details about. What do you mean by that? What kinds of jobs do you think people could get? Would they need to be able to program machine tools to work in there, or could they just lift heavy objects and move them around? Not so much the latter these days, much more the former.
And we're still pretty bullish on the trades.
Boy, we love trades. This is the single highest level of unanimity across the area, that you can have a successful career in a skilled trade like an electrician, plumber, or carpenter. There is, I think, a growing realization that these kinds of occupations have big advantages in terms of the training time required for them, in terms of the potential good paying jobs that are available, and that it's fairly hard to offshore the electrician's work that needs to come and put in your new thermostat. And so there are some real objective economic advantages here. But the other side of the rhetoric that we're hearing talked about a good deal in public policy circles is to make the point that not everybody needs that college degree to have a successful career and a good and stable employment situation. And you see here that this is a case where the public overwhelmingly agrees with that.
Next question deals with an issue that unfortunately is too prevalent in many of our communities. That's fairly high rates of incarceration. And so we asked about the impact of incarceration on a young person. Can you find steady work if you've, for example, gone to prison, but you're now out and you're now keeping your life clean?
And in other analysis we've seen, some of it we've talked about here, how negative the impact of incarceration is on economic and social prospects like marriage, for example, or education, of being imprisoned at some point in your late teens through early 20s. But here, the public is pretty strongly, 3/4 say that you can find long-term work despite earlier incarceration. Here, I think there's, again, some questions I wish we could probe a little more deeply here. How much of this is the normative expression, you've paid your debt to society, you can get a job? How much of it is, well, yeah, you may have a crappy job, but you can get work if you want it? Or how much of it is simply a disbelief in the notion that early incarceration has long-term penalties associated with it economically? But it is certainly clear that in the discussions of imprisonment, incarceration, and that's the impact of that on society as a whole and on the individuals who are incarcerated at some point, this is a perception of the public that certainly needs to be understood in having that discussion.
Very interesting question about success in America. Is it all about your work ethic and working hard, or are you born into success? This was very interesting.
Very mixed picture. Almost an even split between saying it's just a matter of hard work and saying you need to be born into the upper class. And here we see minorities, African Americans and Latinos, more likely to believe that the circumstances of birth are more important. Party and ideology play very strong roles in structuring this. Interestingly, business ownership and the amount of education and technical training, all three of which you would think indicate people's effort to succeed, plays no role in the answer to this question. So personal circumstances reflected in ethnicity, for example, and partisanship and ideology is a projection of your beliefs onto this question. Those are overwhelming. Actual experience in starting a business or getting more education or getting tech training seems to play no role.
We've got about 7 or 8 questions left and about 7 minutes to go here, so we'll just zip through these, Charles.
I get the hint, Mike.
No, I want you to get to these. Let's talk first about the travel part of the region, and that is, how often do people get to other states? How much time do they spend there?
Yeah. Illinois and Indiana really like each other and travel back and forth. Wisconsinites stay home. Okay, next question.
How long is your commute?
Seriously, that's about it. Obviously the population concentration between Indiana and Illinois, you're right, got a lot of people right there next to the border. Here, we've certainly got Kenosha and Racine closer to the border, but the bigger population concentration is a little further apart. Still, the point is, look at the bottom part. Do you travel to one of the other states only once every few years or never? Okay. 32% in Wisconsin say they once every few years or never travel to either of the other two states. That is kind of striking, I think.
How long is your commute?
How long is your commute? Don't move to Illinois. Now, for a long commute. You have it so good here in Wisconsin where only 37% have less than a 20-minute commute, only 22%, not just barely more than half, have such a short commute in Illinois. If you look at the upper end of that, more than pushing a third in Illinois are spending 40 minutes or more each way in their commute. It's only 20% in Indiana. It's only 16% here.
And we live in a very car-centric world too, don't we?
Sure do. So in Indiana and here, it's 90% that are commuting by car. Illinois, of course, has a much denser commuter rail system, and you see that with 11% saying they take commuter rail, and I was a little surprised at 3% in Indiana, because there certainly is the South Shore line that offers a connection there. But bus traffic is also bigger in Illinois and also bigger in Wisconsin a little bit. Again, reflecting availability, we don't have commuter rail here in Wisconsin, so it's not surprising that that's zero, though people could have thought about taking Amtrak as part of this. And certainly empirically, a lot of people do take Amtrak every day here. But overwhelmingly, we're in our cars.
But the commute, we don't really think it's all that bad. I was surprised by this.
I guess
40 minutes each way, not so bad.
If you're condemned to it, you just do it and you don't worry about it. Saying it's pretty easy, 70, 74, and 72, despite those differences. My favorite response option in the whole survey, that your commute is a nightmare. I wanted to put in a living hell, but apparently I didn't need to, actually. Because I'm honest to God, I was really kind of surprised at how few people really seem to suffer from doing their commute. So it suggests we adjust. In Illinois, you just take it. In Wisconsin, you're no more grateful for how good you have it.
And what people want to see improved, Charles, in terms of transportation? They want Amtrak? Do they want commuter rail improvements, or do they want toll roads and interstates improved?
Interestingly, despite the differences in availability and use of mass transit, the answer is basically the same across all three states. 31, 32, and 31 say they'd like to see rail improvements as more important, and 63, 63, and 63 would like to see highway improvements. There are a couple of ways to look at that. One interesting bit is far more people take the car, 75 in Illinois and about 90 in the other two, than the 63 here that would prioritize rail. Obviously in Wisconsin, where virtually nobody takes rail, still has 31% support. Here's the nice kicker. Why is that? The answer, at least in our data, is that Democrats and Republicans are, and liberals and conservatives, are exactly as likely to take mass transit and the train as one another. There are no partisan differences in how you travel. So Democrats and Republicans are equally likely to take a train. But they are vastly different in their response to this question about what should we invest in. With Democrats much more likely to say invest in mass transit, particularly rail, Republicans and conservatives much more likely to say invest in highways. So it's, and if we were getting deeper into this, I would stress it more, so I'll just push it here. The life experiences of people in our data today rarely depend on their partisanship or their ideology. It doesn't have much to do with how much education you get or whether you get tech training. It doesn't have much to do with whether you take the train or the bus or you drive a car. But it's powerfully important when it comes to your preferences about policies in those areas. And here's just the clean example. No difference in actual use of trains, huge differences in willingness to fund them. So our experiences are not necessarily the same thing as our ideology. Our ideology and our partisanship has relatively little to do with our actual behaviors in a lot of these areas, but a lot to do with our perceptions and preferences about them.
I want to ask you, do you want to try and touch on these very briefly in about a couple of minutes, or do you want to? That was a heavy thought, Charles. I thought it was, it was a good way to end it if you want. But we can certainly go on for a couple minutes here.
I think we should say a couple of things about neighborhoods, and sorry about that, and sorry, Joe, I will wrap this up in a minute. But we did ask about neighborhood life. The simple summary is that people are pretty satisfied about their neighborhoods. They think they're pretty safe. But again, as we saw with the people who struggle with the job market, there's a modest number who live in neighborhoods they don't want to live in and are not happy with the safety. We did ask some questions on policing, and I do want to mention that because it's an important policy issue. Do the police arrest too many people for minor violations? And you see here that a plurality in each of the states disagree with that. They don't think the police over-arrest. What about the police being too willing to use deadly force? Again, majorities in each of the, or near majorities in each of the four states say that the police are not too willing to use deadly force. This is, of course, a big policy issue for urban areas right now. And the thing that is so striking is the racial gap in these perceptions. Among African Americans in the three states, 65 to 75% say the police are too willing to use deadly force. Among Hispanics and Latinos, it's 34 to 51% that believe that. But among whites, it's only 32 to 36% that believe that. And so here we have a policy area that's going to be with us for a while in the urban metropolis, and one where the divisions of opinion about this are so starkly striking that it's not exactly ending on the up note, but it is on maybe one of the more consequential issues that faces us as the Chicago megacity and will be with us for some time to come.
There are other results in the poll, a few questions about government and governance and political participation. It's a very interesting survey. We encourage you to read it online, and we also encourage you to read Charles' report, which will be there later today, Charles?
Yes, at 9:30, well, in fact, 2 minutes ago, and our IT people are always very good at this, you can read the whole 69-page report. I know you will want to do that. I will be signing autographed copies out front later. No, definitely not. But if I say so myself, it's interesting for what it tells us about the region, and it's worth paying some attention to.
And I should say, I don't want to speak for you, but Charles will be around here this morning. If you have some questions about any of the things you've heard today, feel free to grab him and ask him a question. So, again, Charles, thank you very much. We're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll be back in the room, really. We're going to hold it to 10 minutes, if everybody would do that. And we'll begin our first panel discussion on what are the possibilities for the Chicago megacity. Thanks. So we've been talking about public attitudes in the Chicago megacity, and we just heard the results of the Marquette Law School Poll, and now we're going to get some reaction to what we learned from the poll and also talk about the possibilities in the future of the Chicago megacity. To help us do that today, we've assembled a panel of folks. We're going to have elected officials in the next panel, but first we want to talk to some people from the nonprofit world, also from the for-profit world, and the business world. And so let me begin by introducing each of the four panelists who are with us today. Seated next to me is Ellen Alberding. She is president of the Joyce Foundation, which has assets of $950 million.
As of yesterday.
As of yesterday. And makes charitable distributions of about $45 million a year. For projects to improve the quality of life in the Great Lakes region. Foundation priorities for Joyce include improving educational outcomes for low-income children, employment and workforce issues, and a particular environmental focus on energy efficiency and water quality. We welcome Ellen to Marquette Law School. Good to have you here. Todd Battle. That's nice. You can feel free to applaud. Todd Battle is president of the Kenosha Area Business Alliance. In that role, he's responsible for managing the organization's operations, including its economic and community development initiatives. As some of you in this room know, Kenosha County is in something of a boom cycle, more than 4,000 jobs and $800 million in private development in the last 2 years alone. Michelle Nettles, we want to welcome Michelle back to campus because she spent a little time here a few years ago at the Marquette University with the Quest program here at the university. Michelle, though, now is the Chief Human Resource Officer for Miller Coors. She is responsible for building and sustaining Miller Coors' leadership capability while ensuring the company retains, develops, and attracts top talent to deliver strong business results. And Miller Coors, as you also know, has sort of a unique perspective on this whole megacity conversation. The company's corporate headquarters now in Chicago, but it also retains a strong presence here in the city of Milwaukee. Welcome back to Marquette, Michelle. And also joining us today is Dr. Carmel Ruffalo. Dr. Ruffalo is Associate Vice President for Research and Innovation at Marquette University. She just joined the university recently. We're glad to have her on board. She is also the Wisconsin Operational Chair for the Alliance for Regional Development, and she is actively involved in tri-state initiatives in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. Dr. Ruffalo also played an integral part in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's review of the tri-state region, the one we were talking about earlier in our presentation this morning. And she served as a Wisconsin delegate to the OECD. We'd like to welcome each of them. And I do want to say also, to pass along, I should say, regrets from Kelly O'Brien, who's president of the Alliance for Regional Development in Chicago. She had wanted to be here. I talked to her a number of weeks ago about joining us. She was eager to do that, but she told me, and she wants me to share this, so I'm not violating her confidence, that she had some surgery. She expected to be fine. She held out hope until Friday and then said, you know, my recovery still needs a bit more work and I won't be able to join you. But she does say they're going to have a conference at the Federal Reserve in Chicago in October, and you're all welcome. So she wants me to know the work continues, and she sends her regrets. So having said that, first of all, welcome to the law school. It's great to have you all here today. And I thought we might begin by just getting some reaction to the poll and what each of you found interesting, because all of you come at this from a slightly different perspective. And maybe I'll just go down the line. Ellen, if you want to take a couple of moments to just tell us if there was anything in particular that jumped out at you from that poll.
So our foundation is focused on public policy issues that affect all of the people in the Great Lakes states, although we leave out New York. They don't count as Great Lakes state from our point of view. But we're always looking for the shared interests and the shared concerns of the people in our states, particularly the people who are most at risk, so low-income, minority populations in particular. We're also looking for areas where there are different interests and different concerns among our states. So the poll was very interesting to us for that reason. It's something that we are trying to explore more deeply ourselves. I want to maybe just focus for a minute on the interest in workforce and training and the focus on jobs, because that's of deep interest to the foundation, and it's an area that we have spent a lot of time and money trying to find pockets of excellence in the training, particularly for adults in each of our states, and to bring people together to share an understanding of how to improve the situation for adults who are in, let's say, adult education, but are trying to get into the workforce. And I'm really glad to be on a panel with a very significant employer, folks with a business interest, and obviously your deep research knowledge, because a lot of the conversations in the workforce arena happen, I think, isolated from the demand side in a way that is not productive for the people we all care so much about. So I think the poll does a nice job of outlining the perspective of folks on the ground, and then what we'd like to see it layered with is the perspective of employers. And of course, the place we play is in the community colleges and in the training programs, trying to bring that, the population of people who need training and the employers who need a skilled workforce together. So it's sort of a piece of the pie that is very useful to us.
We'll drill down on that in just a couple of moments. And Todd Battle, your perspective, what did the poll tell you? Did it surprise you in any way?
I think the takeaway for me is it kind of confirmed why regional cooperation can be so difficult at times. There's a lot of momentum and there's a lot of interest in working together on certain issues, transportation, workforce, some of those areas. But when it got closer to home or closer to the pocketbook in terms of jobs and taxes and what's in my best interest, there seemed to be less a spirit of cooperation and more I'm going to look out for my own selfish interests. And as a person that works in the trenches of local economic development, we see that at times that, when it comes down to ultimately the choice of where is this project going to go, there is kind of that competition for, who gets the prize, so to speak. So it kind of confirmed for me why it's so difficult. I don't think it makes it any less important, but it certainly confirms that there is difficulty in bringing the region together.
Michelle Nettles, you represent a company that's a major employer in this region. What was your take on the poll?
Yeah, so we're not just a major employer. I mean, we have employees from all three states. And so from my perspective, one of the things that was most striking was it confirms the data that we see around talent and the bifurcation, as Professor Franklin talked about, between the division in education and how that shows up in the workforce. And as an employer, one of the things that we're most concerned about is how do we attract the right talent to provide the work and the services that we need. And I think the survey did a really nice job of confirming that bifurcation and the big opportunity around looking at a regional approach. In Chicago, we have the benefit of a higher educated population. And if I reflect back to the Miller Brewing Company days, before we moved our headquarters to Chicago, we actually did have an office in Chicago for the mere function of recruiting diverse, highly educated talent. So I think the big opportunity here is really how do we address the talent gaps and that bifurcation that's showing up in the poll.
Dr. Ruffalo, what was your takeaway? I mean, you have a unique position with the Alliance, and you've been involved since the beginning of this conversation. What did the poll tell you?
Well, and first I want to say thank you to Professor Franklin. I really am grateful, as many of us at the Alliance are, for you to conduct this work and all this wonderful results. Really, myself, and I have Mayor Dickert here as well, who were really the delegates, along with Dean Amhouse, to go at the end of 2011. We actually went to France to present the OECD work. So some days I feel young, but when I start thinking about, I'm starting to, because it's a heavy lift, let me tell you. So what are my perspectives? First of all, I think it confirms a lot of the things that we see at the Alliance as well. The Alliance is really the only organisation in the whole area that is really looking at how do we move economic growth in the tri-state area. And so many things that were seen here in the poll also reflect what we've seen. For example, the Alliance is led by the private sector. So we knew that going in terms of the fact that we knew it was going to be the private sector, and it looks like many other people in the region also think that. The workforce development results aren't surprising either to us. We have spent a lot of time in that area at the Alliance looking at, it's not just a skills gap, but also how do we match these the employers with the talent, both on the supply side and the demand side. Sometimes that communication can be a little disjointed. One of the areas that we really didn't get into, but having the benefit of looking at the report, is the transportation side. And I won't steal Mayor Dickert's thunder, but we have also seen what we see at the Alliance is what has really been reflected in the poll. So no great surprises, but I do want to put this in. And that is, I'm so happy on the results of, I think it was question 31 in terms of manufacturing. As many people know who I am, I'm a huge supporter of manufacturing, so I was really happy to see that result.
Let's get into this workforce issue, because I think that's a pretty rich topic to discuss, and from different perspectives on this. When employers, for example, talk to you, Todd Battle, what are they telling you they want, and what are they expressing any concerns about the quality of the workforce or the availability of the workforce?
Yeah, with respect to workforce, it is certainly a top-tier issue, probably the first or second question asked in any type of legitimate site selection inquiry, availability, quality, fit of labor force for a particular company or their operation. So it's certainly an issue. I think we've taken, we've been excited about the growth of the Kenosha area, and so, we'll talk about the types of companies that are moving there and the type of economic growth we're seeing. That's great. The other edge of that sword is a new employer perhaps looking at the community will go, well, that's great that the community's added 4,000 new jobs. I'm worried about the 100 that I have to fill if I move there. Where are those skilled workers going to come from? So it's certainly a top-tier issue. It is, its availability, its quality, its goodness of fit with the particular operation. So I think that it's kind of a broad-ranging issue. For Kenosha specifically, we are a bit of a bedroom community. So there's, to a large extent, you saw those commuter numbers. There's a number of people that reside in the Kenosha area that don't work there. So we feel like just from a local availability standpoint, there's a little bit of a latent labor force that isn't yet captured, but on a bigger picture regional approach, we have some work to do there around the development of the labor force.
I thought, Michelle, I'd be interested to know from your perspective, as you recruit people, as you look for people, and we should say Miller Coors, it's an old habit, sorry. As a guy
as long as you're drinking our products.
But my question is this, is that Miller Coors employs people who work in white-collar jobs, obviously.
Correct.
But also in jobs on, working with the assembly lines, working with in the factories here at, for example, in Milwaukee. You're looking for different workers with different skills.
So in Milwaukee, we actually employ just over 1,400 employees. It's almost evenly split, a little more index on the manufacturing side versus kind of the salaried employees. In Chicago, just under 500 employees. And I will tell you, on our salary side, we look for people with college degrees. You are rarely going to find a job at Miller Coors in our salary population without college degrees. In our manufacturing facilities, absolutely, we're looking for skilled, trained laborers. And so that licensing piece is a big opportunity for us as we think about talent and how you pull talent across the region. But when I look for my salaried employees, for my marketers, for my engineers, although MSOE is here, disproportionately, it's easier for me to go out and buy talent than to recruit talent from the city of Milwaukee. And that makes this regional approach more attractive to us. Again, as I said, we moved our offices before we moved our headquarters. We had an office in Chicago deliberately in order to recruit diverse talent. And so it's just easier for us to go buy that talent. So the one thing in the survey that was referenced with respect to the private sector leading the way, well, I think the private sector will lead the way. It's complete fallacy if we think that we don't need government, we don't need nonprofits, we don't need the academy to help fuel this. It's absolutely required that there is a partnership across all sectors in order to address the talent gap here. And on the salary side, I would say there's a talent gap specifically in the city of Milwaukee.
Yeah, sure. So when we started focusing on the talent gap, it was also at the height of the unemployment problem. And it was very hard to persuade people that there were employers who were saying, I don't have the people to fill these jobs. I need talent. I have open jobs, when you had 9% unemployment. I mean, it just didn't compute for a lot of people, and yet it was really the case. So when you're sitting at a foundation trying to figure out, like, how do we use our money, it sounds like we have a lot, but in fact, you have to be pretty focused to make a difference. What we had to go at, we went at this problem, which is a big one, but we had to say, what is the problem we are trying to solve? What is the problem where we think we can make a difference? And the thing that we decided to focus on, the problem we decided to focus on, is so many adult learners who are trying to transfer jobs get into these remedial education programs at community colleges or elsewhere, and they never come out. They never get a certificate. They don't get a degree. They spend their Pell money. They use up their time, and they don't end up with the skills that lead to a job. So what we thought we should do, and we did this regionally, was look at what was going on in Wisconsin, Minneapolis, Illinois, and Indiana. What was the problem, which was huge in all of those states, and were there spots of improvement? Could we figure out a strategy for the community colleges and other government services to focus not just on the remedial education, but what do people need to walk in your door and have the certificate that will lead to a job for them? So these are called bridge programs. That's sort of the technical term. And these very intensive efforts to take, let's say all of you were trying to transfer your skill set into some other job, take this room full of people and not just give the remedial education, but give the training and the certificate that is going to lead to employment. And we have done a pretty extensive evaluation of the project. We haven't released the results, but let me just say Wisconsin is a shining star. The programs that Wisconsin launched have a tremendously higher success rate in terms of getting people to complete the programs and get them into jobs. It's very exciting. And from our point of view as policy wonks, of course, what we want to do is demonstrate that you can make a change in these highly bureaucratic systems that aren't amenable to change, but you can get them to change, and you can get the results that employers want and that citizens want for their communities, so that you're not having to go out and buy or transfer, I don't know what the right word is, but poach people from my city to come up to your city. But in fact, you can build your own here. And so we're really excited about this. And one final point, these were not state-by-state projects. We brought everyone together. These folks who are working in isolation, they're often not well paid themselves, and they don't have a lot of opportunity to interact. And we'll buy them a plane ticket or a bus fare to come together with their colleagues, and this is a big deal, and they learn a lot from each other, and we've seen a lot of advance.
I wonder if you can describe for us what that program looks like so people can get a sense. You talk about the shining stars here in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
What does that program look like?
So picture picture like a remedial math class where you feel like you're being talked to like you're in 5th grade or 7th grade. It's really it can be very depressing. And you're sitting at a blackboard and you're going through a process that you didn't do well at to begin with, and you're going through the same process all over again. And not so great. What many of these programs do is take those math skills but put them in an environment or a context where you're using them in a job. So let's say you're a cashier, or let's say, I don't have any particular good examples, but the idea is to match the skill with an actual thing you would do at work. And it's sort of common sense. People fly through these programs at a much, much higher rate than when they're just sort of going through the same math class that they failed at when they were 15 years old, and here they are, they're 40 years old. So it's matching the actual activities that you would do at work with learning a particular set of technical skills, or math or reading or whatever, seems to motivate and cause people to succeed at a much higher rate.
And you're saying this is a regional?
These are programs. Each state has gone its own way. They have, you're combining federal and state money, which is complicated always. Also the interests of the local elected officials and the talents of the people running the programs. But in essence, we're trying to extract what works best and embed them in these programs in the states. And it's been a very well received, and a lot of sharing going on among the states that you're talking about here.
Interesting. Colonel, maybe have you get in on this part of a discussion, the workforce issue. How much progress, I mean, we've been talking about this for 3 years. How much progress have we made really in 3 years in terms of addressing some of these concerns we're talking about right now?
So if we go back to the OECD report, one of the, I think, greatest criticism was the training issue. Multiple people doing multiple training, but no real result in trying to get these people back into the workforce, either into a job or into the next level in their, if they were incumbent workers. So workforce development, as many of you know, is multifaceted. There is a number of things that impact on how we develop training and of course, what we get from the federal government and the different rules that come in. So what we have seen between, since 2012 or 2011, 2012 till now, I think I want to go back to Alan and say I think Wisconsin has been the shining star with what at least Reggie Newsom's, our Secretary of Workforce Development, has been able to do with their Fast Forward programs. We don't have that. They don't have that in Illinois, and they don't have that in Indiana. And I think that has allowed some maneuverability with employers to try and match these skills to the jobs, and also the grow your own. So there's different types of training. I know that when we at the Alliance brought people together from all the 3 different states to specifically talk about workforce development issues, a number of things were realised. First of all, we all have the same problems. That is, there's no doubt about that. Second of all, we chose at the Alliance and with the tri-state region to focus on the positive of what we have here in the region. And I think one of the shining stars that we have within the region is our work ethic. The Midwest work ethic is something to really be celebrated. And we did that at the Alliance by producing a video which we gave to hundreds of workforce boards, economic development folks, to really exemplify that we here in the Midwest, yes, we have problems in workforce, there's no doubt about that, but our ethics, our workforce ethics are really superior compared to the rest of the nation. And the logo was fast, together, and now. Working together within the region. Actually, it was working together and fast. So we celebrated what the good and worked on what we do best. One of the things, have we made progress? This is, I would like to say we have to some degree. In terms of the training, we took a different tact at the Alliance and looked at what the 3 states did well. I mentioned fast forward here in Wisconsin. In Illinois, they had developed through their workforce development agencies something that they called hiring events. So instead of having a job fair, these were hiring events where people actually came, where employers and potential employees came together and people had interviews at these events and actually walked out with jobs. And in fact, what happened with the help of the Alliance and the 3 states, each of the states actually adopted this hiring event, procedure. And so we had one in Illinois, we had one in Indiana, and we also had one here in Wisconsin. And in fact, the one that we had here in Wisconsin was the event that Gateway Technical College put on for the Amazon hiring. So, and that worked really, really well. And so what we would like to do as we move forward at the Alliance is to see some of these hiring events to happen a lot more than just the job fairs. Because with the hiring events, you actually walk out and the employer and the potential employee come together and you actually get hopefully, if there's the right fit, again, matching those skills, the person can come out with actually being hired. So Illinois calls that their hiring event. And we thought it was a great model to be implemented throughout the region. So, this was never going to be easy, but we're taking steps, and there's certainly a lot more to go. We have moved the needle, I think, and certainly compared to what we were 4 years ago, only 4 years ago. The fact that we can all get into a room and discuss our workforce issues as a region, I think, is also important. And I think we need to have more of those discussions, and to not only look at the problems, but also to find out what the shining stars are and how we can implement them across the region.
I'm curious about, and this is for Michelle and Todd, when companies are hiring, or your company is hiring, what are they selling? Are they selling the region right now? And if so, how do you do that? What's the appeal as an employer, for example, Michelle, to potential employees that Chicago has, that New York doesn't have, that Los Angeles doesn't have, that London doesn't have? What are you selling?
Well, it's quite interesting. So on my team, we have a group of individuals who actually do some research on every city where we have operations. So even where our plants are in North Carolina versus in Golden, Colorado. And Milwaukee is usually a tougher one to sell. So one of the things that we look at for the city of Milwaukee is Chicago, proximity to Chicago. We absolutely sell that. We sell the opportunity to have to relocate to other locations within Miller Coors or internationally with our parent companies. But then thirdly, which I think Milwaukee and the report actually talks to, is kind of quality of life. And that's a big one and a big opportunity to continue to sell is, by and large, when we have employees here, if they can manage through the winter, they absolutely enjoy the summers. And they absolutely enjoy their neighborhoods, the people in which whom they commute. So it's really around the quality of life. And in that, and it's actually interesting, you are selling, the Bucks, you're selling the Brewers, you're selling, the entertainment, you're selling the opportunity to even have that same in Chicago. So it's the broader community that gets sold. We also obviously sell the opportunity at Miller Coors. We talk about the number of other corporations that are here. So again, this is for our salaried workforce. We're talking about the number of corporations. In Chicago, though, it's a different sell. The sell is around usually, and again, millennials, it's the opportunity to be in a city like Chicago around the arts, around just more millennials in the population and the diversity of a city like Chicago, educated population. So we sell it slightly different, same things, but we get a lot more focus on the millennial population. In contrast, we don't have to sell gold in Colorado because Denver is one of the fastest growing migrations that's happening. We don't have to sell our Dallas location. Again, another city that's one of the fastest growing. I think Wall Street Journal recently just had an article of the top 10 cities that are growing and people are migrating, none of which are in the Midwest. So we don't have to sell in other areas. Chicago and Milwaukee, we absolutely do have to sell.
So
You're reminding me, though, of an executive recruiter who told me the second hardest thing in the world to do is to get somebody to move from Manhattan to Chicago. The hardest thing in the world is to get them to move back from Chicago to New York. Because once
so the lifestyle makes a big difference. You can get someone from the Northeast to move to Chicago because they're used to commuter trains. They're used to cold weather. They're used to high taxes. So they're used to those things. But they're able to have a more vibrant quality of life. And I think that's one of the big things that the region has to sell is just the quality of life. And back to the commute, they're smaller. And it would be smaller if we invested in high-speed rail.
Yes.
Don Battle, I've got to ask you, when you're selling companies on the idea of doing business in Kenosha County, and you've had a fair amount of success doing that, as curious, some of them are Illinois companies, not all. Amazon, certainly not an Illinois company. Are you selling, what are you selling there? And again, is it a region-focused approach, or is it something more specific than that?
Yeah, I think it's certainly Midwest and Great Lakes region to some extent. And then when you kind of get a little bit more granular and you're talking about, we want your business in this particular community, I think we sell the entire region. You're located here, you can draw your workforce from this 45-minute radius, which gets you to Milwaukee and to the north side of Chicago. You've got access to O'Hare and General Mitchell. You've got all of these kind of world-class amenities, yet in this particular community, you've got a little bit more of a small-town feel, a little bit more of a small-town atmosphere, safe neighborhoods, good schools, good access to health care. And so for some companies, that's an important play, that they can be in a community that's a little bit smaller and in a little bit more of a, not as much of a metro or urban area, but then they can have access to all of the amenities that would be provided by nearby kind of major metro areas.
Quick question about education, Ellen Alberding, because your foundation does a lot of work in this. Anything in the poll that surprised you? I mean, you've got, in the state of Indiana, for instance, 50% have achieved a high school education or less. It's a big number.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the most interesting things in the poll because that showed really distinct regional differences in educational achievement. And interestingly, Indiana, although we've tried very hard to work in the workforce environment there, and they do have a wonderful community college system called Ivy Tech, the policy environment is very, very difficult. The willingness to invest in certain kinds of programs just, politically it's just really hard in Indiana. It just, it has been for a long time. The advocacy community, which is an important part of pushing for these, types of changes, isn't very strong there. So there's a lot of sort of both infrastructure and political barriers to seeing the kinds of progress that you would think that the leaders in the state would say, this is not great. Look at us compared. And if I were taking this poll around, that is one of the messages that I would communicate to folks in Indiana. This is not good for you. Governor Daniels, whom I really admire and have had some very good exchanges with, liked to set us up in competition with each other. He put up all these billboards between Indiana. Is Mayor here? Is Karen here?
Yeah, she's right over there.
Yeah. Hi, Mayor. With the exception of the mayor of Gary, Indiana. But I think you know what I'm talking about. anyway, when he was governor, he put up all these, they were funny, but not so funny if you were from Illinois, billboards about competition between a well-run state and what he perceived to be not a well-run state in terms of taxes and services and so on. But I would come back at him with those, education numbers and, and their transportation. And they've got a lot of issues in that state that do not serve the low-income and undereducated population that they have. Whereas I think, Wisconsin, Minnesota, to some extent Illinois, to some extent Michigan, has invested. They've tried to make the services and programs and education systems responsive to what is ultimately an employment challenge.
You've raised an interesting point, and this is something I want to bring in Carmel on this discussion. You've got different governors. You've got, they're all Republicans, but they do compete. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the challenges. How can you do things of a regional nature when you have states that are so competitive and sometimes tweaking each other quite publicly? Doesn't that make some of the stuff we're talking about pretty difficult?
Sure does, especially right now. There's a lot of tweaking. And I have to say, Wisconsin is taking the high ground and, really setting the example of being the diplomat in the 3 states right now. It does become very difficult. Look, we were in end of 2012, maybe 2013. The Alliance was actually at our, annual meeting. We were actually able to bring all 3 governors in to talk. And we thought we had that was just fantastic, until we realized, yes, they were all going to talk, but they all came in at different times. So, and so it becomes difficult. They all, I think to some degree, they all agree that regionalism is beneficial to the 3 states, but they find it very hard to actually implement and actually, carry out regional activities. And I'll never forget when Pence came in and basically said, look, this is all great, but I don't wake up every morning and think of how I'm going to help Illinois and Wisconsin. Okay, so the culture isn't there. I think that's one of the things in terms of regionalism and the 3 states. What are we changing? What are we trying to change here? It's really the culture and the thinking. And Michelle, I agree. We need the government to help in this endeavour, but it becomes very difficult. And I don't want to get too political, but it's one of the things that at the Alliance we have to deal with all the time. But you find ways to work around it, and you find the projects like the transportation projects and the workforce development projects that you can actually move forward without them being solely dependent on what the governors are going to react to. And that's what I think we need to find. Because, look, it'll never be, no one's going to be, to quote Dean Amhouse, no 3 governors are going to sit around singing Kumbaya. It's not going to happen. And not in my lifetime now, I could be wrong. So you look for initiatives that will move the region forward, that are not solely dependent on whether the governor agrees with it or not.
Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to push back just slightly on that, because I do think there is one issue in particular where the governors do have a shared interest, and that is water. And as you know, the Great Lakes are 20% of the world's fresh water, surface fresh water, and it is in the interest of every governor and the entire congressional delegation to protect the quality and quantity of Great Lakes water. And so we do see nice cooperation on that front. You can do, there's a reason that there's congressional support for this, because people do polling around the region. People, in their districts really, really care about water quality and water quantity. And that is true at the state level as well. So there are issues where there is clearly, you can't, in Indiana, just control your little piece of the water. It's all, it's sort of obviously all interconnected. So I do see opportunities there. The Council on Great Lakes Governors and other convenings of governors, we find ways to get them to work together. Or they find ways to work together. So it's not exactly the issues that you work on, but I don't want to say all hope is lost because
No, I
there is
didn't mean
possibility.
to say all hope is lost. It becomes
It's frustrating, though.
exactly. And there's ways, again, initiatives. You find initiatives to move forward
Yeah.
that you can move forward.
Did you want to add something, Michelle?
I would echo Ellen's comment around water. I mean, given beer, water is essential to us. And so from a sustainability perspective, we do think the tri-region approach has been successful. And we have been recognized for our commitment to the Great Lakes and for sustainability. So I would echo Ellen's comment with respect to the cooperation that exists today.
Well, let me even push that further. You have, for example, the Water Council, which used to be the Milwaukee Water Council, but now it's the Water Council, I think with the hope that it would be something perhaps a little bit more perceived as being more regional in nature. Is that an opportunity that we should be pursuing with much more urgency than we are right now? I'm not saying so much in this area, but perhaps in the Chicago area. Perhaps I know John Dickert, the mayor of Racine, who's here today, feels strongly about the water issue. Is there more we could be doing, even building on some of the things that you talked about? Is that an appropriate course of action if you're talking about regional initiatives? Anybody can feel free to.
I think so. I mean, at the Alliance, we've been looking into how we can expand on the Water Council and having Dean Amhouse alongside us to see what we can do in Indiana and in Illinois. The issues are different in each of the states. There is some level of cooperation. But I think it's interesting. I also want to say, having worked with the Water Council for many years, the strength of the council is because it brings in the government, the academia, and the business. And that model, I think, is something also to be shared throughout the region, and because that allows you to have a platform where all those three pillars are able to actually interact and engage and move things forward.
I would add that it's the model that you want to look at, and how do you look more broadly across sustainability and not just water. So as an employer, one of the things that we would be very much keen on is how do we look at, rail. And in that, when we think about our employees, sustainability is increasingly become one of the issues that millennial employees are very much interested in. And they're not just looking at commuter rail as an opportunity to get to and from work, but it's how do you care about the environment holistically. And I think the Water Council could serve as a really good model to start thinking about sustainability holistically, and been very successful, private sector, public sector, and government. So,
Tom Battle, talk about opportunities in this region for a moment. That's part of this discussion. We want to say, what's the future look like if we talk about a Chicago megacity from your perspective as a guy who's trying to improve the business environment in Kenosha County? Where are the opportunities and where are the possibilities that have not been adequately tapped so far?
Yeah, and I guess, our efforts, focused on Kenosha kind of more parochially, I think aren't ignorant of the fact that this region, kind of survives or doesn't based on the Chicago and Milwaukee influence. So I think while maybe at times motivated by our own kind of selfish interest in a particular community, I think there's some enlightened self-interest as well that this region, is only as strong as Chicago and Milwaukee and the megacity. So I think we're cognizant of that as I look at this region and I think about like some of the opportunities we have. I think the water issue that we just touched on is a particularly interesting one. We certainly wouldn't talk about our February weather as a comparative advantage for some of our southeast and southwest states. But when you talk about the supply and the quality of our fresh water, that is a comparative advantage. So there's a particular strength. As we've seen manufacturing make a resurgence in the United States, the strength that the Midwest has generally, and our area has particularly around manufacturing competency, becomes another strength of this area, and one that, while we see foreign direct investment and other investment coming into the United States and going to places in the Southwest and Southeast, I think there's more robust and more significant infrastructure in the Midwest to support this resurgence in manufacturing. Those are a couple of opportunities I would point to as maybe kind of best case situations for us here in this region.
In the transportation issue, I just have to get some reaction from anybody who would care to weigh in on this. But I was struck by the poll, which, as I called it, a car-centric world. I mean, we're interested in that, and yes. We have some interest in improving our toll roads and our interstates, but that was the priority over commuter rail and Amtrak. Is it hard for politicians to make some of those big decisions? Those are going to have to be political decisions in many respects. Is it hard for politicians to make those kinds of decisions when they look at poll data like that that's pretty clear on where people think the priorities should be? Is it difficult? And yet I would imagine probably in many respects all of you might like to see a more robust, more varied transportation system.
I felt like I would want to maybe drill down on those results a little bit more, because it's not consistent with other polling data I've seen on the topic. So I'd want to know, like, where are these people? Were they skewed rural? What types of folks were answering that question?
Charles is around. You can.
I would poke on that one a little bit, because
Sure.
I think there's a lot of data that suggests that people who live in cities sure want their rail system to be enhanced. Younger people sure want to travel by train; they don't want to drive. So I don't know. It may just be a function of this particular question or who is answering it.
Yeah, I was blown away by 75% of people that had an average commute of 40 to 60 minutes one way were okay with it. Doesn't seem consistent with the way people choose to live their lives or how happy they are about it. People with an hour plus commute one way don't generally, to me, strike me as very excited about that.
I actually got a call from my husband last night, 30 minutes into a drive to the suburbs for a dinner. He's like, I can't believe people do this. So, okay, maybe we're kind of urban, but...
So maybe directly to your question, though, Mike, just looking at the economic development prospects of this region, I don't see how they wouldn't be enhanced by a more robust public infrastructure and transportation system, particularly rail and commuter rail. So I don't see how that would be disadvantageous to our region and its ability to prosper and grow. Yet it's a challenge politically and otherwise to get support for some of those big ticket major rail and commuter rail investments.
Anybody else have any thoughts about the opportunities in this region that exist today and that maybe we haven't taken advantage of?
Apart from water?
Yeah, apart from water. We've talked about the workforce and the quality of the workforce. We've talked about some of the challenges in terms of education and what seems to work in addressing some of those challenges.
Well, we haven't even touched the higher education system. We haven't touched the healthcare system. You think about the entrepreneurial spirit that's taking hold in Chicago as both a source of great new business ideas and an attractor for young, highly talented people. All of those things are obviously critically important, and we just haven't. I think we all understand that they're there. It just wasn't part of this poll particularly, but. Certainly having a robust higher education system, I know there have been debates about that here in Wisconsin, but it's, most places there are not debates about it. You want to invest in your state, high quality state, relatively low cost higher ed.
Mm-hmm.
I want to piggyback on that and say, the higher education in the whole region. And then I also want to say, knowing a little bit what's going on in Illinois and Indiana and also here, the willingness of the higher education to really support the entrepreneurial spirit on campus. I think that is going to be the pipeline as we move forward to generate more people who want to start their own business, who are less averse to risk. So I think that is creating a generation hopefully of students and then citizens that are more likely to be entrepreneurial, and I think that's going to be good for the region.
Actually, a focus on this campus.
That's right.
In fact, yeah.
One thing I would just say, most college students in the United States are in community colleges. And the pressure on community colleges to link what they're doing both to higher completion levels and to jobs it's not a missed opportunity, but it's a huge opportunity. And there are a lot of folks in that world that are working on that, but there's also a lot who are not. And I think that is something that needs an intense focus, because so many people are in these systems, and so many of the systems are underperforming, and they are a generator of great workforce outcomes if properly incentivized. So maybe that's getting at your question a little bit.
Yeah, I want to take some questions from the audience here in just a couple of minutes, but I wanted to sort of bring this full circle, and we're talking about the prospects of the region, and it's a competitive world out there, and each of you plays your own role in this region. The OECD report has said the Chicago megacity was at a tipping point. Mm-hmm. And I'd be curious to see if you share that opinion. And I think what it was getting at is that there's at least a possibility we could be falling behind some other large cities around the world, that we have to think a bit more creatively about our future. I'm wondering how you feel about the tipping point comment, and I'll just go down the line on that. I'll start with Ellen.
I think there's a lot of potential, and so maybe that means we're at a tipping point. But we have some issues we've got to address, and I see Mayor Barrett's here. We have got an issue with violence in our two biggest cities that is a plague on all of us that has got to be addressed. And I think it's not really happening for Milwaukee, but Chicago has become, that's what people are thinking about when they think about our city. This Chirac kind of concept. And that is, it's bad for the city, it's bad for the region, it's bad for the people who are victims of violence, and it is something that, must be addressed. It's a top priority for us. So, on the one hand, we have a lot of great stuff happening. The economic flourishing of many parts of our states is great. I think our education systems are great. We have a lot of great things going on, but we also have this very persistent problem that needs to be addressed, both, for real reasons related to human life and for reputational and potential growth reasons. So.
That has long-term consequences, doesn't it?
Yeah,
the
it
reputation of this as a place where you would want to live or raise a family or whatever.
Right. And I don't know how many in the room know our mayor, Emmanuel, but he is a very aggressive recruiter for our city. And I don't want to see anything get in his way, even you. But I know you're probably as tough as he is.
Go, Todd.
Yeah. Anyway.
Tipping point?
Yeah, the thing, I guess the parallel I would try and draw as I think about it is Detroit and Southeast Michigan and some of the challenges that area faced, and then eventually leading to the city of Detroit, going through bankruptcy, largest municipal bankruptcy filing in the history of our country. And you kind of look at some of the issues that are plaguing, particularly Chicago and in this area, and
or the fiscal health of the state of Illinois.
Yeah, and you kind of look at it and you say, if this doesn't get fixed and we go down the path of a Detroit, that isn't good for anyone in this region at all. So, I don't know if you call that a tipping point or not, but it's pretty important that some of these bigger fiscal issues that have the potential to really negatively impact our largest city, got to be some solutions there, or we're headed down a bad direction that didn't do Detroit well at all.
Michelle, from the for-profit world, what's your take?
I would agree. It's at a tipping point, and I think, again, Professor Franklin talked about the bifurcation that's happening in education that's showing up in the workforce. I think the region must address that. Fundamentally, employers, if they continue to just buy talent externally and import it in, you're going to constantly have a revolving door. And so unless we can really move the talent from high school through college to jobs and high-paying jobs, I think you are in a very tough situation economically, and how do you sustain that? The other challenge that I think that we would face, back to Ellen's point around the violence, one of the things you asked me is, how do we recruit people? And it was fundamentally the quality of life. If you have an increase in violence that's showing up in your large metropolitan cities, that makes it less attractive to bring that talent in. And then lastly, one of the things in the study that was really surprising to me was the over-indexing and the support for manufacturing. And while I believe it's absolutely core competency for the Midwest, a lot of that will be advanced manufacturing. And so with that, the skill sets that's needed, fundamentally different, but also the number of jobs that are available will contract. And so banking on manufacturing, I think, while it's an opportunity, let's be very clever and let's think about what that means in an advanced manufacturing environment. And that actually goes back to the bifurcation in the education sector. So what are we doing to really move the needle around the skills that we're developing at our tech schools and higher?
Yep.
Carmel, I'll give you a final word.
And thank you for saying the manufacturing piece. Now I don't have to repeat that. You know, in terms of tipping point, so I'm a medical microbiologist by trade, and I see things maybe a little differently to everybody else, and I look at sustainability, and I also look at industry and what industry needs. And I also think about, what do we do at a day-to-day basis? We all eat, right? So we all need food. And so that brings me to thinking about water. And I think the tipping point is water here. And the industries that are what we call wet industries, and where they are going to go in the near future. And with all the problems that we have with water on the West Coast. There are industries moving out of the West Coast. Where are they going? I think there's a lot of movement coming our way. And I think that is going to, along with everything that my colleagues here have said, I think we need to take into consideration of the fact that we need water in manufacturing, in food. We all need to eat in food manufacturing, even though we're looking at manufacturing at the local level. It still needs water. So I think the water issue is going to be the tipping point, which means we should be thinking a lot more regionally, and we should really think how we can collaborate on a regional basis. So my challenge is to everyone here, right? Because I could throw out a challenge and you know, get everyone to really think about what they can do in their own, you know, realm of collaborating on a regional basis and moving projects forward, because it's not just the big projects. There are many projects out there that can really be moved forward on a regional basis.
Let's take we've got about 7 or 8 minutes for questions. We'll take 2 or 3 questions. What I would ask you to do is, if you have a question and you're in the seating bowl, you press down on the rim, not on the button, but keep your finger down on the rim. We'll be able to hear your question. If you're seated somewhere in the back and you have a question, please raise your hand, and Ryan has a microphone and he will come over so we can hear your question. So any questions from anyone here in the audience? Do I see anybody? Yeah, we've got a couple down here. So just press down on that rim, not on the button, but on the rim. There, keep your finger down and we're good. Go ahead.
Oh, technology.
There you go.
Okay.
Advancement.
I guess my, this is awesome, isn't it? I feel like I'm beamed up, but my question is about the, you all have this commonality of what happened before and what's happening now. And my concern is, have we learned from our past mistakes in that there's a lot of investment and this kind of cyclical investment in education and industry, and then it leaves, and you're left with people who were funneled through a certain industry and now have no place to go and no place to work because, for instance, our industrial base has left, and now that entire sect of population is getting older, and there is this gap in knowledge. And then on top of that, that creates then a stratification of hope and basically looking to the future for any type of positive expectation of change. So I'm wondering how you think Because before it was industry, now if it's water, how are we going to get the people in that middle that watch their parents lose their jobs because of deindustrialization? How are we going to get them educated in a very short turnaround to not give the now generation even less hope and less expectation?
I think that's that's an interesting question, because I think it says something about our world, that the world is changing so quickly, and what is the industry of the moment or the business of the moment changes very quickly. And how do you have an education system that adapts quickly enough to meet those changes and prepares people for an environment that is changing constantly? Am I kind of getting at what you're talking about?
Yes, sir, absolutely. And how do you address, because all of this is very top down, how do we address on the ground where people are lacking and they're hurting and they're seeing businesses leave, and then on top of seeing businesses leave, the recruitment is from elsewhere, and people are brought in from elsewhere, and there are people here sitting going, whoa, I could do that job if you invest in me, not just the industry, not just getting the corporations here, but invest in the talent pool on the ground as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, Michelle.
I won't hit it all, but I can hit it in a couple of places. So in the city of Chicago, we partner with United Way, and we have a back to work program. So we take individuals who are unemployed, and we help give them skills and train them. And those individuals may not come and work for us. They may go work for other places. So back to the private sector, how is the private sector making investments and partnering with nonprofit organizations to help address that gap? Secondly, one of the things that we do, and the study showed this, we do it with our manufacturing employees and we do it with our salary workforce. Millicor has been recognized as #1 corporate university in the country. And we are very much committed, and I used the term buy earlier. We do buy talent, but we're very much committed to building talent. And so to the extent that we are able to find individuals locally, we will invest in them and help them grow their careers here in Milwaukee or in Chicago or wherever we operate. I think what you'll find if you look at other employers in the city of Milwaukee and Chicago is that they are increasingly building out their corporate universities. They also, like we do, we partner with universities all the time, be it their online programs or be it that we send individuals for a 6-week program to help build that talent. So I think employers will increasingly do that when there is a gap that's happening in the talent pool. And then the third one is, and I think Carmel talked about it, it was Ellen actually, really what's our voice in a private sector to really encourage that advocacy and that investment in secondary and higher education. If that happens earlier, and particularly in the STEM environment, if that happens earlier, you start getting individuals who are being more planful around their careers and who are making choices. By and large, Midwesterners come back to the region. And so if you have jobs and you have quality of life, I believe even though there is a brain drain that happens for a period of career, what I've seen is most Midwesterners will come back, especially when they have children.
Mm-hmm. Anybody have anything to add?
Yeah, I thought I'd just add, kind of in that question was, people had certain training and then those industries left, and have we learned from that? I mean, the other thing I guess I would just say is, the other thing we ought to learn from that is that there needs to be a commitment to lifelong learning. There isn't this, hey, I took this 2-year degree, now I have this skill, it's a career for life. I mean, everybody needs to be reinvesting in their skill sets, and, industries change all the time, and specific skills or credentials you have may become irrelevant by technology or anything else. So I think embedded in that response is just a stronger commitment to continuing education and lifelong learning to sharpen skills and make sure that we're prepared for new and changing industries.
One more quick question, and then we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to take this guy right up here.
Michelle, can you talk about the potential for Milwaukee that you envision if we had a high-speed train from Milwaukee to Chicago, and whether it's a 20-minute train, 30-minute ride, or 45-minute ride. We all know Chicago's always going to have an NBA team. They're always going to have an incredible skyline, an incredible world-class art museum. But what would that do in your mind for Milwaukee in terms of our postcard and in terms of getting people to move here?
You still got a lot of people who take the train back and forth between the corporate headquarters in Milwaukee, don't you?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, Milwaukee still needs to invest in those opportunities that you name in the sports arena and entertainment and the arts. You have to do that because we have people from Chicago who come, particularly for Summerfest, particularly come down to Milwaukee. And so I think the train would absolutely allow for that tourism to happen. As an employer, I have employees every day who travel back and forth. In fact, I took the train last night because it was convenient. I am leaving here at 11, but I will not take the train because I'm cautious of will I be able to get to where I need to get to in time and the convenience of the train. The train takes about 90 minutes. If I plan my travel correctly, I can get door to door in 2 hours at convenience and ease, not sitting at a train station, not having to walk through crowds. I can do that. But if the train was actually 40 minutes or 60 minutes, it makes it more compelling for me personally and a vast number of my employees to get on the train and to frequently move back and forth. Another thing that employers are doing, in the absence of that, you invest in major technology that's costly to facilitate meetings to and from Milwaukee and Chicago. So we have what's called telepresence. But I can tell you, high-speed rail would make life easier, quality of life, which is the #1 thing for my employees, quality of life easier. It would make it easier to share that talent back and forth. We have meetings in Chicago because of flights from O'Hara. You can get to Chicago versus having them here in Milwaukee, which we have the facilities with our university here, facilities to do that, largely because it's hard to get between Milwaukee and Chicago. And high-speed rail would allow us to have more activities here in Milwaukee where we built a university. It would allow for our employees to go back and forth. So we're big advocates of that. And then lastly, as I noted earlier, my millennial employees, they are very much interested in sustainability. So building out roads and tollways is not something that they would see an employer making an investment in.
We're going to wrap things up. I want to thank you for the question, and thank you for the question. And we're going to take about a 5 or 10 minute break. But before we do that, I just want to say thanks for everybody's interest and attention. And I also want to thank our panelists. Ellen Alberding is the president of the Joyce Foundation, Todd Battle, president of the Kenosha Area Business Alliance, Michelle Nettles, the chief human resources officer with Miller Coors, and Dr. Carmel Ruffalo of Marquette University and the Alliance for Regional Development. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
I'm David Haynes. I'm the editorial page editor at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and I'd like to welcome you back. I think it's great that Marquette is continuing to pay attention to this important issue, and we have another great panel. I'd like to introduce the members. To my immediate left is Mayor Tom Barrett of the City of Milwaukee, John Dickert of the City of Racine, and Mayor Karen Freeman Wilson of the City of Gary, Indiana. Welcome to all three of you. Thank you for coming. Welcome to you both. I'd like to start with some reflections on the polling that Charles Franklin conducted. I wondered if there's anything that stuck out to each of you or any takeaways that you saw in the data. Can I start with you, Mayor Freeman Wilson?
Absolutely. First and foremost, I want to thank the Marquette Law School for the opportunity to join this esteemed panel. I've served with both of these gentlemen a number of times. It's always a pleasure. I also want to thank them for keeping this conversation alive, as you have said. The first thing that struck me about that questionnaire or the results of the poll was that I thought that people were being a little aspirational in their answers. And
well, what do you mean by that?
I won't call it something else. I thought long and hard about that term. And what I mean by that is that it is wholly inconsistent with what I have experienced as mayor in talking to my constituents and talking to constituents in Northwest Indiana. And I'll give you two specific examples. The first is our efforts around commuter rail. There is right now a movement to expand the South Shore to the southern part of Lake County, Indiana. And when I made a decision as one who has an interest, a vested interest in the current and the existing South Shore line that goes east and west from Chicago to South Bend, and I said, I want to see the expansion of the South Shore to the southern part of the county, not because it goes through Gary, because it doesn't, but because I believe that will help the existing line, and it will also encourage people to move more freely between Chicago and Northwest Indiana as a whole. And I believe that there's an opportunity for jobs. Additionally, the Ileana, which again doesn't go through Gary, but does have the ability to benefit those of our citizens both in Gary and in Northwest Indiana through making it easier to travel. Not only did Gary citizens have an issue with that, but Northwest Indiana residents had an issue with that. Why are you making decisions that don't directly benefit Gary citizens? And so they had this very myopic view. So I don't know who was polled, but I can tell you that the folks that I talk to on a daily basis, and I talk to a wide variety of people, do not agree with that sentiment. And I think that it sounded like a good answer to the folks that were polled, but when you translate it to really asking them the hard questions, then they give answers that are more consistent with what I've seen and the results that I've gotten.
Mayor Dickert, seeing more cooperation in Racine these days?
Well, Racine's the place to be, and I think that everybody knows that. Outside of my two neighbors here who probably will eat me up in it someday, but here's the way I saw the poll, in much to what the mayor was talking about. It's a bit of a snapshot. And I think for the most part when people are polled, just like when they talk about their future, they think positively about it. So they'll say we want regional cooperation, but they'll then go back to parochialism. Here's my hope and my concern. My hope is that when we went to Paris 3 years ago, actually coming up on 4 years ago now, the OECD saw something in our region. And what they saw was that this Great Lakes region, if you take it straight north, is the third largest economy in the world. But they saw a problem, and the problem was with manufacturing and our slow growth as it relates to the economy and that dip that we saw. So they said, you know, you're really poised as a region, especially around water, to be the growth capital of the world. And that's really what the OECD report kind of looked at. So we broke it down into those couple areas and said, okay, let's jump on those areas, transportation and workforce, and let's see how we can start building that together. And my thought, personally, my thought was, we're going to do it as mayors. Because the reality is, nobody else is doing it. Washington's definitely not doing it. And our state level governments, we can't even get three governors who are in the same aisle to agree. So we're going to have to do it as mayors, because really we're, in essence, the only people getting anything done. So, just speaking the truth here a little bit. I'm Catholic, sister, I got to put it out there. So really it comes down to the real decision as, you know, I think it's imperative upon you, not casting the blame or work here, but it's really inherent upon you to start telling your elected officials, if you're not doing these things, then we really don't want you around. Now, are most people going to say that? Well, when it comes right down to it, I don't know. But I will tell you this, and I think we're going to get into this. If we don't start building regionally, and if we don't listen to the OECD, and if we don't listen to logic, which is if you create a transportation system that is efficient and effective, you save money, cut taxes, and allow for opportunity. If we don't start doing things like that, there is one thing that I can guarantee you as a mayor, and I don't even have to be a mind reader. This region will fail. We will fail the world. We will fail our people. And here's my point. We will fail our children. And as a mayor, I refuse to do that. So it allows us opportunity, but like the mayor said, when it comes right down to it, are people really willing to go to the wall on things that are bigger than them? And I think that's the main question.
Mayor Barrett.
I must not have spent as much time studying the poll. I thought it was a good poll, don't get me wrong. But frankly, there was nothing there that jumped out at me where I thought, oh, I didn't know that. I think it's true. People, they're rooting for their home team first and foremost, and there's nothing wrong with that. All of us, we're going to be pulling for our own cities, and we should be pulling for our own cities. If we can work together, of course people want us to work together. So, and that's what I took away from it is, yes, as long as it's not hurting me, go ahead and work with them. But if it's going to hurt me, I don't want you to work with them. And I don't think that that's different from human nature. I think that we recognize, going back to what John was saying about the OECD, yes, this region has incredible potential. And the previous panel talked about water. Water unites all three of us. The Great Lakes unite all three of us. That asset is such an incredible asset that is what's going to bring us together. That's going to bind us more than anything. And I think that's where we should be having a lot of our focus on what we can be doing to build off that. And that's consistent with the poll, I think, that yes, let's work together in places where we can.
So along those lines, what's some of the low-hanging fruit for mayors in terms of working together across state lines? Water is one, and what might that look like?
Well, 6 years ago, I think we would have said transportation was one, with high-speed rail. I think all three of us would have said that, and I think a lot of people believe that. But not surprisingly, in the poll, where you saw the difference in the priority that you had for highway funding versus trains, I would be very curious as to what the distance people were from the train who answered those questions. In other words, if you're in Rhinelander, the fact that there's high-speed rail between Milwaukee and Chicago and it affects Gary and Racine is not as appealing to you. It just isn't, and there's no shocker there. And in downstate Indiana, I'm guessing it's the same thing. Sure. So I think, again, 6 years ago, we would have all said that's low-hanging fruit. Let's get this done. There's a lot of momentum. Obviously, the political winds shifted vigorously, and that didn't happen. I still think that there's going to be an opening there because it's such an obvious one. It is such an obvious one that it's going to have to happen. I don't know when the political winds shift again, but to have high-speed train service that would really bring our three cities together, I think would be very, very important.
I also thought it was interesting in the polling that while at most only 11% of the people polled said they use rail to get to work, about 30%, or roughly a third in each state, said they'd like to see more investment in it. Mm-hmm. So is that an opening for that discussion?
I think it is, and again, a lot of this is the political dynamic and whether the will is going to be there to get it. The reality is we had an opportunity to have it because of the actions in the state that disappeared. But even the Chicago to Milwaukee run, we were on a bipartisan basis able to go back and say we want this to happen. But I think by then the train had left the station, and the federal government was not about to give us any money for that.
I think if you look at the answers and if they were dissected by age, then you would see much more of a demand for high-speed rail. And I think that is really one of the opportunities, transportation in general. And so the younger you go in the polling respondents, then the more of a demand you would see. And I would suggest that would be across states Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. And so I think there is a real opportunity there, but it has to be among all 3 states. It has to be among governors. I think it has to be among the mayors in the major cities. You know, we have one major city mayor. Well, all of us are major city mayors. Don't worry, John. I didn't want to hurt John's feelings, but the reality is, unless you have some buy-in from Chicago, unless you have buy-in, even though Indianapolis is not in Northwest Indiana, unless you have buy-in from Indianapolis, then we are limited. And I said that to John earlier. You know, we can agree as mayors. We can agree to cooperate, but as long as our state Department of Economic Development is putting up Illinois signs, then that undermines my ability to be a cooperative regional player. You know, and there are other state policies that would undermine that as well. And I would say the same is true in Illinois and Wisconsin. So, but I think that Mayor Tom had a good point. Let's look at those things that we can agree on. I'm really intrigued by the concept of regional licensing, the ability to have licenses that will sort of serve me in all states and thereby make me a lot more mobile. And I think that's especially true when you have economies that have historically been very dependent on industry. There needs to be more mobility among residents. And so to have licensing that will allow us to do that. But I think that there should also be a closer look at job training and really more technical training that might make us more mobile as well.
I think there are really 3 things that are low-hanging fruit. The first one is this whole western and southern edge of Lake Michigan. I think our region is poised to be the leader in water technologies. I think when you look at the Water Council, which is one of 4 of the largest incubator-type accelerator organizations in the world, they're poised and really need to be, I almost think, pushed a little bit into that space because we have it. In this region, we push, pump, and clean water better than anybody in the world. And I think we have to take advantage of that. The second piece, I think, is really advanced manufacturing. This region was heavy industrial. We lost that, but I think Tom's comment about we're not the Rust Belt, we're not the East Coast, the West Coast, we're the Fresh Coast, I think is one of the best quotes I've ever heard. We need to take advantage of that and utilize that to build on what we already have in advanced manufacturing. But I'm going to touch on transportation again and one more time, and this is why. The East Coast, when you go out to the East Coast, you can grab a train anywhere, you can grab a commuter rail anywhere, you can grab a bus system anywhere. California is starting to compete against the world with that as well. Florida's doing the same thing. The reality is we are behind. And I'm going to say it again, if we don't catch up, and if we don't create an efficient, effective system of transportation, and we just keep building wider and wider roads without remembering that you can have a tube of toothpaste that is 7 feet wide, but if the hole is this big, guess how much is coming out? So in our cities, all the transportation goes down because there's limited roads through the cities. So you can create 17 lanes, but you will always have congestion. If we are not building on that, and we are not creating a system that, number one, high-speed rail, we forget, takes 1,600 cars off the road, which allows for what? More expedient truck traffic, which does what? Save businesses money. It also allows in bad weather to have consistent transportation so you don't have to worry about air travel. There's all these things that go with transportation. If we don't build that system, not only can we not compete against the coasts, we can't compete against overseas where China is building more high-speed rail faster than we can blink. So it all comes down to, are we going to start doing what's right and what's logical, or are we going to keep electing people that keep doing what's illogical and cost us money? I just don't understand that, and I think that's low-hanging fruit for us.
Well, on that point on transportation, as Mayor Barrett pointed out, the high-speed rail is not happening, at least at this point, in Wisconsin. But there was great support for the Hiawatha service, and there continues to be. Ridership is through the roof. Is there an opening there to expand that service?
Well, again, you have to realize we're dealing with reality here. And the reality was that when we turned back the $800 million, that included money to upgrade Hiawatha. So following that, this was a place where the city of Milwaukee did agree with the leadership in Madison. We went back to the Federal Department of Transportation and said, look, we know that you're mad. They were mad. They were mad.
Oh, yeah.
Because the state of Wisconsin did one of these, right in the federal government's eyes. And so we went back, and I was part of this. I said, look, I understand you're mad. I understand that you were embarrassed by what happened here, but this makes sense. But my belief is their view was there's no way that they were going to do that. There was no way that they were going to fund that Hiawatha. Now maybe they'll get over it at some point, and I hope they do, and I'll be the first one there to push for it. But there were consequences to what happened there, and it did hurt. I thought it hurt this region, but I couldn't agree more that this is an area where we have to catch up to the other parts of the country and other parts of the world in our transportation system.
Yeah, the real big thing here is that the OECD and the work that we're doing with the Tri-State Alliance is forming a transportation plan. In other words, our job right now, and we've been working on this for the last couple of years, is to put together a game plan for this entire tri-state region, including all 5 forms of transportation, including boats, and because we have one of the best harbors around, we should be utilizing that. Putting all these things together and literally putting that plan out there and saying, okay, Congress, and to the next presidential candidates, if you don't do this, then this region can never compete against the world, number one. And number two, if you don't do this, you're crazy. Because it not only saves money, it grows jobs and it grows the economy. So we're putting together kind of a game plan to show people this is what the OECD and the Tri-State Alliance is all about. But to Tom's point, reality is one thing, but if we show them a plan that works for everyone, for absolutely everyone, I can't understand. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I was about to say, I can't understand how anyone would turn it down, but it's Congress. So I can see how they would turn it down. But we're going to try to make it so logical and so cost efficient that it's almost impossible to do it. And then we have to do our sell job with the DOT and the presidential candidates to make that happen.
So 3 years ago in the OECD report, it was not terribly optimistic in some ways about the region. It noted, as was mentioned in the previous panel, that it saw the region at a tipping point, and it condemned the rivalries both intrastate and interstate. Have we improved in the last 3 years? Are we any better off?
Go
ahead, girl.
Not at all. I mean, the rivalry has really been ratcheted up.
At the state level.
At the state level, yeah. Right. And even at the local level. I mean,
Except for us.
Except for us. Okay. We all love each other.
We do.
But, and it's not, love has nothing to do with it, quite frankly. It's really about the great need. Yeah. The need for jobs, the need for a tax base to sustain your economy, and the need to really move your city forward, and what your citizens, how your citizens view that. And so this has to be driven at a very grassroots level.
Why didn't you do it?
Do what?
Drive at the grassroots level and help people understand.
Let me jump in, if I may. The phrase tipping point always connotes something that you're about to fall off the cliff. I look at it in a totally different way, and I can't speak for Gary and I can't speak for Racine right now, but I'll say this about the city of Milwaukee. The city of Milwaukee is at a tipping point in a very positive way. And what I mean by that is I have never seen the energy among young people greater in this city than I see right now. And it's not just energy about going at the bars and things like that. It is being translated by literally tens of thousands of young people and people who are young at heart who are moving back into the center of the city. And this is a demographic seismic shift. because we talked about transportation before. You can't be shocked in the 1950s when you built the interstate system and you had families moving out to the suburbs. They were moving out, they wanted bigger yards for their kids. What's the shock about that? Now there are smaller families. You have young people coming out of school with more debt than ever before, so they're delaying the purchase of an automobile. Many times they want to have an alternative form of transportation. And who do millennials like? They like other millennials. And what's happened here, and I think it's an urban experience that's being replicated around the nation, is that cities are reinventing themselves. And so, yes, this is a turning point. It's a turning point where we have young talent that wants to be here. When Michelle Nettles was talking in the last panel about the young talent and how do you attract young talent, they want to be with other young people. And we've tipped where now that happens. We have to continue that. The challenge, at least in the city, and I think this is probably true for Racine and Gary, is that we have a lot of people that have been left behind. And we have to find ways for those who don't have the education and the training to be able to join the millennials who do have the education and the training. That, to me, is a challenge. And so all this thing about what's going to happen in the Midwest isn't going down the tubes. We've got this water.
That's right.
We've got the fresh water. And you can't invent that. Here it is. And so is there a transition that's occurring? Of course there is. Are there things that we should be doing in transportation and education and workforce training to make it better? Of course there are. But I'm very bullish on the future of this city, and I'm very bullish on the future of this region because the fundamentals, the geographic fundamentals are so strong.
Yeah. And that too, I just want to kind of jump on Tom's point. We all sit on national and international water panels, boards. So we are dealing with the issues on a regular basis of what's going on with water. But one of the things I think is consistent is I was just in California where they have about a year's supply of water left. Florida is very quietly running out of water, but they're running out of water. And their new issue is sinkholes. So, hey, look, we got a new sinkhole today. That's not the kind of thing you really want to brag about in Florida. So Texas is either completely dry or completely underwater, depending on what's happening with the rain events. The one thing that Tom's absolutely right about is that we are in a place with the largest amount of fresh water in the world that is drinkable, and I would suggest getting more beer to come in here. They should actually be making more beer here in Racine, well, I'll take it in Racine, but in Milwaukee. But so as you see these problems in the South and in the West, any large water user of 2 to 5 million gallons or more a day are going to start looking for resources that are sustainable and cheap. Well, guess what we have? So to Tom's point, if we're not preparing these transportation mechanisms, the work culture, ready for the quality of life that the young people want, if we're not preparing for this in our region, in this tri-state region here, what will happen is these companies will come in, they will leapfrog us, go into Michigan, Pennsylvania, upstate New York. They will go wherever they have to go, wherever they're ready. So it's inherent upon us to take advantage of exactly what Tom talked about through our business development, our water development, our transportation, everything else. Because if we're not prepared, those millennials, they will go somewhere else, guaranteed.
I want to push a little bit on this conversation because each of us could list a number of things that are happening in our cities. Mayor Tom just did it. Mayor John could do it. I could do it. Can we do the same thing about this tri-state region? We can't. So the question is, how do you translate the great things that are happening in Milwaukee, the great things that are happening in Racine and Gary, to great things happening in this tri-state region? I think that's really the discussion point, and that's really the challenge that we have in this room. Now, I would further argue that I don't know that we have all of the people in this room to really answer that question.
Let's turn to workforce development for a minute. A couple of you have raised that issue. It came up in the last panel. Is it possible to work across state lines on that issue? and how would you do it?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that we're facing in Racine, and I'm going to talk about Racine, because the mayors can talk about their cities. In Racine, we feel pretty blessed. 6 years ago, our unemployment rate was at 17. Right now, it's at 7. But I will tell you that that 10-point drop is nothing compared to what we have to do to go from 7 to 4. And I think we have to be honest about this. I think we have to be upfront about this. And I think we have to have a serious conversation about the impacts of poverty, the impacts of lack of transportation, workforce development, training, all of those things, because if we don't break the poverty issues, the educational issues, and things like that, we can work forever to try to get that 7 to 4. It's not going to happen. So we're planning on a new project in Racine to start going after and providing a series of wraparound services for folks to say, okay, listen, we're going to stabilize your life and then try to get you into a job so that we can work through this. But you know what? All you hear is the politicians out there, and by the way, we're mayors, so we don't actually have a politician thing. So you hear the politicians about there, well, if those people would just work. Oh, come on. I hate that kind of talk. Because that's really just saying, I don't really want to address the issue, so I'm just going to say some ridiculous statement and then just tell these people that they're lazy or some nonsense like that. We have to start addressing the core issues. If we do that, we can break that cycle, but that's hard work. We do it every day. We have to. We have no choice. Sure. We have to do difficult things every day because the governor right now has got a cap on how much money we can spend. So we can never raise the amount of levy that we have. But if we don't get to that point, we're never going to break that workforce issue. You've seen that people are getting more advanced training in technical schools. People are getting more degrees. All that stuff is growing great. But that last 7%, that's the real work. And our challenge to the other elected officials is when are you men and women going to actually hone up to it and start working with us on that and solving the problem instead of throwing some ridiculous statement at it?
I think that if you look at the opportunity among the tri-state region relative to workforce development, it can come through our commuter colleges. Each of us has a system in Wisconsin, in Illinois, in Indiana that could be standardized in a sense, or that could be connected in a way that would work for all of our citizens. And so to start there in a way that would allow for a basis for advanced manufacturing, to use John's point, or as a basis for training in water technology, as we advantage the work that we're all doing around water. I think there's a tremendous opportunity there.
You brought up manufacturing, and I guess I was struck by this number, and I'd be curious to have your reaction to. There was substantial support, enthusiasm, in fact, for traditional career paths in manufacturing and the skilled trades. And yet, even though advanced manufacturing is a real thing in this region, the number of jobs in manufacturing have shrunk quite a bit. Is that a leadership challenge for the three of you?
Again, that's something that we face as mayors on a daily basis. We have our workforce development agency, our Milwaukee Area Workforce Investment Board, that is actively working with employers, because what we experience, and I'm assuming you may see the same thing, is what I call the ships passing in the night phenomenon. And I will always have this etched in my memory, being at an event on a Saturday morning here in the city of Milwaukee, in the central city, and it was in a church basement. There were over 100 people there, and it was about workforce issues. And so you had people who were frustrated because they didn't have driver's license, they may have had criminal records, they had child support issues, so they couldn't get the jobs. And the tension was unbelievable in that room. I left that room, and by pure coincidence, I toured a manufacturing concern on the northwest part of the city. Same day, same city. And as I was finishing that tour, I had the general manager come up to me and say, "I'm so frustrated, I can't find workers." So here we are, the same city, the same day, and you could have been on Venus and Mars. And I bet you see the same thing, Gary?
Every day.
I bet you see, their heads are going up and down. Mm-hmm. This is real. This is what we experience. Yep. So what we've tried to do is we've reached out to manufacturers themselves and said, you need workers? We will get you the workers, and we will train them for those specific jobs, CNC jobs. We'll train them, and sometimes we train them on their own machinery, or we work with MATC, or we work with Waukesha County Technical College. And so you avoid, what I describe it as, you avoid the middleman. And you avoid the middleman because the frustrations I have are talking to people who come out of a generic workforce training program and they can't find a job. Or you talk to an employer who's hired someone out of a generic workforce training program and they're not suited for the work. So we try to team up the actual jobs with real workers and do it that way. So that's one part of what we do on a daily basis. The other thing, which is again very real in a city, is we've got people returning from institutions, from prison. And they're the toughest people to find jobs for. First, because they've got the criminal record. Second, because they probably have not developed the workforce skills. So the city is starting to hire some of them and getting them into transitional jobs. My whole theory there is that it's easier to look for a job from a job. And they have to get that positive momentum in their life to be back in the workforce. And so that's something with our very limited resources, and we'd love to have more resources to do that, is to get people on that positive train. So worker development, both for people who don't have problems in their background and people who do have problems in their background, is something that local government, at least here, deals with on a daily basis.
And I wish, candidly, I wish the state would come back and actually talk to us about this. I mean, Tom's got great programs going on here. I'm sure Karen does too. But in Racine, we did a first choice or vocational ministries program. 58% of our people that are incarcerated come out and we get them in employment. Okay? So about $100,000 a year if you're in federal prison, we're actually saving now. So that's been successful. We do a boot camp program with Gateway Technical College in tandem with our business community. We ask our business community every 6 months, what are you looking for? They'll say CNC operators. Okay, we train CNC operators, 98% of them are walking right into employment. So all these great things are going on at the local level, and yet you've got all these people at the state level going, well, we should do something about this. And we go, we are. If you would fund it and you'd give us that opportunity to grow it, we could actually deal with the problem. The biggest concern and the reason that I've got gray hair, and
I will too someday.
She's
I don't have any gray.
Is when we were talking about that whole rail system, 4 or 5 years ago, I had one of the biggest companies in Milwaukee say to me, you guys have a bunch of welders in Racine, right? And I said, oh yeah, we've got a bunch of welders that are sitting on the bench right now. Well, I need about 50 of them. I said, fantastic. So I went back to my welders. I said, hey, there's a bunch of jobs up here, and if we get this train, it literally pulls up within 50 feet of the company. And the guy said, fantastic. So they all came on board. Well, the train didn't go. And I said, well, you guys, is there any way for you to get up there? No. Why? Because I've been unemployed. I don't have a car anymore. And the answer from the state, literally, well, just tell them to buy a car. I said, what? They're unemployed. They don't have money for a car. Well, just tell them to buy a car. With whose money? The disconnect is amazing. So we're solving the problems at our local level, but there's no connection to what's happening at the next level, and that's holding us back.
Mayor Freeman Wilson, do you see that in Gary?
Oh, absolutely. In order for us to really promote job opportunities for Gary residents, we've had to take that matter into our own hands. And so we have held job fairs in partnership with the Boys and Girls Club. We have literally helped to pre-screen and get people employed. And when we go to our local workforce office to say, look, this is the process, this is how it can happen, they spend more time getting folks like us jobs. Well, I have a job. And even if I didn't, chances are I could find one. But there are folks who are much harder to employ who need your help, but it's a much heavier lift. It's a much heavier lift.
So in the OECD report, it was quite critical of the number of governmental units. We love our democracy in this region. and that was mentioned in an earlier panel as well. In the polling, the current poll, people were asked about that, and they said they would generally like to have fewer levels of government, fewer units of government. How does that sort of fractured nature of the government in the tri-state region affect what you do? How does it affect cooperation between governments?
Well, I think there might be a difference in Illinois, which is obviously a large part of this sample. I think they've got a gazillion units of government. I might be wrong, but I think there's a lot. They have. It's much different from Wisconsin. I can't speak to Indiana.
Board commissioners.
But they have a lot of elected officials in Illinois, just in different areas. So I think some of it's going to be there. I didn't see I don't remember the breakout of the issues. I think you do experience that somewhat. But here, locally, we've got essentially city, county, school. And there have been conversations, obviously, in the past about whether some of those, in one way or another, should be grouped with another. I don't see that as the biggest problem. I think what happens oftentimes when decisions are being made is, and this is where elected officials come in by their nature, and this is, again, human nature, they want to have their fingerprints on something that's coming past them. And I'm sure that's true with your council members, and they want to see it. The same is true with county board members or school board members. And is that good or bad? You don't want them to micromanage, but if they didn't care, if they weren't looking at it, then you'd think that they were totally apathetic. So it's one of the challenges of democracy, but I'll take democracy over getting rid of it. And I think that's the other side, is I don't want to see the power concentrated in too few individuals. I'd rather deal with the messiness of democracy.
We in Indiana have city, school, township, and county. And so I would say that it is somewhat fractured. I think that the opportunity, because the question always begins, so what do you get rid of first? But the opportunity exists for cooperation between the different units of government so that you have more efficiency, less waste. And at least by that level of cooperation in the among the units, you would begin to realize how you could function better on behalf of the people.
I just think that the only thing I would add to that is that you hope that you can utilize the local governments to push up and provide the pressure on these issues up, but it's really going to take all these folks out here to help with that, because we can try as hard as we can, but when you start pushing up against the state, you really don't have much to push up with. It makes it a little bit of a challenge if they're not on board with those types of decisions.
So as another finding in the poll, I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts were on this. It surprised me. In all three states, to varying degrees, the respondents said that they felt that the state legislature had treated them fairly. It was a little close in Indiana, but especially in Wisconsin, it was by a fairly wide margin. So how do you feel about that? Is your region being treated fairly by the state legislature?
Boy, where do we start? I think if you take a look at this budget, you're going to find a whole bunch of interesting things. But I think the reason that people respond that way, I think it was 47-45 in Wisconsin.
I think it was more pronounced.
It was a little more
51-36, I thought.
Yeah.
So.
For Wisconsin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that is interesting, and we see this because Tom was in the legislature, I staffed the legislature, is that when you cram 700 items into a 1 week session in the state legislature, people might learn about one or two. They don't learn about everything sub 100. We have to deal with those things that are all in that big pile of mess that the press doesn't report on because it's not important stuff, but we have to deal with that. And what we've been seeing from the state, to Tom's point earlier, is this constant degradation of local control. And yet, this is where it's happening. This is where results are happening, but yet they're constantly stripping away everything that we have or can control, which means that it's less that you can control because you're the ones that elect us. So I don't think that the average citizen knows that's happening, because when you push all those things into a week, the press is only, God bless you, but you're reporting on 1, 2, 3 of the biggies kind of staying focused on that. And then the next week, there's another couple hundred. And that's my concern, is that the people really don't see what's going on in Madison, and then all of a sudden, a couple weeks later, they'll go, why did that happen? And you go, well, the legislature just said, and then we have to deal with it. And I think that's an important part of what we all have to do together to make sure that, like Tom said, we're not losing that control, and yet the people know what's actually happening out there.
That's even more pronounced in Indiana for a variety of reasons. One, because of the media markets. There's literally a media blackout between Indianapolis and Northwest Indiana because all of our media comes from Chicago. And then there are simply philosophical differences. There is a large belief among Northwest Indiana residents that all of our tax dollars go to Indianapolis and stay there. That when you look at the tremendous development that has happened in Indianapolis, from the football stadium to some of the other development, that we're paying for that and getting very little in return. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I tend to believe it might be. But even if it is not true, there's a perception there. But I will tell you that the more that our legislative representatives work together, the more the Northwest Indiana delegation works together, the greater our results are. And so I think that's the lesson in that for us as a Northwest Indiana region.
But I will say that I did find that finding significant, because there was a significant difference among the three states, and you're correct that it was most pronounced in Wisconsin. But I think that following paragraph noted that the most unhappiness was probably in the urban areas and people of color. Charles had it going up and down to make sure that I got that correctly, which says Milwaukee, says Racine. And so you can see some of the policies that have the impact. And just to give you an example, the residency provision in the state budget that reversed 75-year settled law here in Milwaukee, the Court of Appeals decision that was unanimous was just blistering in reversing the trial court and noting that even though on its face the statute purported to be statewide, it was aimed right at Milwaukee, just right at Milwaukee. And they successfully hit it. Now, I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do, but I thought the Court of Appeals decision really called that one as it should have been called.
Mm-hmm. So let's open it up to questions for our panel. Yes, ma'am, in the second row.
Do I press this?
No.
Press the rim.
Oh,
there you go.
You have spoken fondly about water. Ms. Aberdeen, when she was on in education, the last panel, mentioned it. And thank goodness, because that is such a big issue. But you're not mentioning, you sort of alluded to regulations. Our DNR in Wisconsin is under the thumb of our governor, and we don't want to regulate. We don't want to inspect. But if we keep on having factory farms, huge animals, waste farms, our water is going to be at risk. If we have people continuing to do frack mining and cutting trees with no regulations, our state is going to suffer, and the same with our education. If we allow the privatization to come, rather than educating every child, because at the base, at the bottom, that is the base if you want jobs. It's nice to have community colleges and see which one you want. But if we don't have our children from the bottom up educated in the public school, it has to take every child and have the same regulations when we're having them picked off into private parochial and voucher schools. Everyone that goes takes away from the public school, and that is the base of our democracy, and we're allowing it to be destroyed.
Right. I will tell you that after the Toledo incident, and if you're not familiar with it, I'll Give you a synopsis. The city of Toledo, a mayor who had been mayor for like 3 months, I think, had to make a call, which is probably one of the toughest calls in the world, which is he had to shut down his water system to 500,000 people. Imagine the mayor, you wake up in the morning, turn on your shower head, and there's nothing there. So he did that because of farm and other waste that is coming down the Maumee Valley River into his area. And Toledo, if you are in the city of Toledo in the summertime on Lake Erie, it's pretty much pea soup. So imagine taking a boat from the harbor here and driving out 21 miles before you actually see open water. Well, welcome to Toledo and Lake Erie. It's called an algal bloom. It happens because of fertilizers and other things, and this is something that's real. We are trying to work with, us as mayors and an international group of mayors are trying to work with the United States government and the provincial government of Canada to solve this. And people say, well, why? Well, number one, because do you really want 21 miles of green slime out here? Can you imagine how that would impact Summerfest, your boating industry, and everyone else? Number two, they're finding respiratory problems with it. So when people say, well, you know, what's the big deal with those regulations? Well, the big deal is this is one of the most valuable resources in the world. Are you going to protect it? Because I will guarantee you, if you're walking down the street with your child and a bunch of thugs come up and they look like they're going to do harm, what's the first thing you're going to do? Grab your kid, right? You protect them. If we don't protect this, we have Toledo everywhere. There are algal blooms in southern Lake Michigan. There are algal blooms in Lake Winnebago. There are algal blooms in Green Bay. So if we don't think this is going to happen, you're wrong. Do you know that right now, because of the invasive species of mussels that we have in Lake Michigan, if you took all the water out of Lake Michigan right now and you walked across to Michigan, you would not touch sand? There are 15 trillion zebra and quagga mussels covering that lake's bottom. See, we don't know that, and by the way, we could report on that. You guys did a great series on your water stuff, but we're not talking about this stuff. And you know what? It's killing our lakes. But as long as everybody turns on the faucet and gets this, it's ignored. So Toledo, after shutting down their water system for 3 or 4 days, once they turned it back on, the national press was like, all right, we're done. It goes back to our kids. Are we going to make the tough decisions and do the right things, or are we going to let people who think that this isn't very important?
Let's go up to the back. Yes, sir.
Yes, Mayor Dickert, I've really loved your call a few times for us to do things, and I'm trying persistently to start some democracy clubs. Aside from that, I believe democracy ought to be easy, enjoyable, and then it's effective. Since you brought it up, are you doing anything in Racine to encourage participation? If so, how?
Yeah, we actually have a green committee that we're starting in Racine to start educating people more and more on the things that are happening. One of the toughest things that every mayor has is that every person in their city thinks their city's the worst, and every other city's great. So I've talked to 107 classrooms, read to them and talked to the kids about what's going on in Racine, and we talk on a regular basis about the top things that Racine is known for. One of them is water and our beaches. So we have a Green Racine group that's actually coming out now to start educate the entire community on what's going on and what's going right. But we do a lot to educate people on why not to put your pharmaceuticals in the toilet, why you have to seal it and throw it in your garbage instead or take it back, why not to dump your lawn and fertilizers into the street because that pollutes our lakefront. We try to make connections so that people realize, oh, well, if I do that, it's going to have that negative impact. So that's something that we do on a regular basis, and we're going to continue to do it because it's how we keep everything cleaner, how we do it cheaper, how we, take that younger generation and take them to the next level so it becomes the norm for them.
That's excellent. Just a quick follow-up. In particular, I'd like to see more governments encourage people and find programs who encourage participation.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. can hear you.
First of all, Karen, John, and Tom, thank you for your breadth of knowledge. I think we all have benefited by hearing your comments. Although I think we've kind of ignored what you'd call the elephant in the room, or given the state of nature of things in Milwaukee, the lion in the room, and that is the amount of homicides in the mega city corridor, and the fact that because in part the media plays it up, in part the general public looks at the mega city areas, the mega murder capital, and are concerned about it. Ellen mentioned it briefly in the panel discussion before yours. Can you talk about, not that it's bad, we know it's bad, we know you all care about it, but what is the impact on the image of the mega city today and its future development in the next quarter century with this problem being where it's at today?
Well, it certainly is an issue here in the city of Milwaukee, I can tell you that. 5 years ago, we had 71 homicides, which was the lowest number of homicides that we had in a generation. This year, we've already surpassed the number of homicides that we had all of last year. And I'm contacted, and maybe both mayors are as well, whenever there's a homicide or a shooting in the city of Milwaukee. I used to get a phone call. Now I get a text message. So just to give you an example, on July 3rd, I got home from the fireworks with my wife, and my phone dinged. And I got the text message, which was a very sterile message. And it came to me as 16-year-old black male, shot, fatal. Turned out the boy was 14 years old. But I looked at that one and I thought, oh boy, this is fireworks night. This is a bad night. I went to his vigil at his mother's home the following Tuesday or Wednesday, which is something no one in this room ever wants to do. You talk to a mother and a dad who've lost a 14-year-old son to violence. I went home. 4 hours later, my phone dinged again. A 13-year-old. It was just written about, I think, in the paper yesterday, who was killed in his kitchen. 2 nights later, I went on a ride-along. A 15-year-old was shot. This is a very serious problem. It affects young men of color in particular, who are the victims. I'm talking about the victims of violence in this city. In Chicago, I assume in Gary, in Racine, that's who the victims of violence are. And it's why, as much time as I spend, and I spend a lot of time in all the good things that are going on in downtown Milwaukee, where there's a lot of positive momentum, we have to have that momentum extend on an economic basis, and an educational basis, and a family basis into the neighborhoods, into the neighborhoods where the poverty exists, where the crime exists. So it may not have been spoken about here, but I can tell you that most of my time, if you're going to put different categories, most of it is spent on those issues. But it's not just, all right, we got to have more cops, because going back to that July 30, we had a police officer who was as close as that wall was to me. And the police chief was within a block and a half. He heard the shots. So this was not a situation where we didn't have enough police officers. So you have to go upstream. You have to go upstream, and whether it's families, whether it's education, whether it's work. That's why the workforce development is so critical, because too many of these kids are living in areas where the jobs don't exist. Gary's been devastated. When you had the steel mills that left Gary, that left a huge hole, I assume. We had similar dynamics here with breweries, with foundries, with tanneries, with factories, and that's why the imperative is, how do we find, and this is the point John was making, to go from 7% to 4%, how do we deal with that issue? I think that there's a correlation there, not a direct correlation there, but it's not something we're ignoring. Trust me, we're not ignoring it.
Similarly, about a year and a half ago, we embarked on a comprehensive approach to addressing crime, and it really downplayed the involvement of the police, because anyone who's been around for any time knows that you can't arrest your way out of the problem. So we deal with education, we deal with mental health, we deal with community-based approach. The faith community has been a large part of the effort. But even in the face of that, we have seen an increase in homicides. In fact, in talking to folks from around the country, they've seen it all over. It doesn't mean that you stop. It means that you double down. But probably even more than water, this is something that sort of is transferable. This is something that is mobile around the tri-state area because people go from Gary to Chicago to Racine to Milwaukee, and they do it on a frequent basis. But I would also say that among law enforcement, that is an area where we have really seen a high level of cooperation in terms of intelligence, in terms of really working together. It could be more, but I would also say there's another opportunity for us to work together outside of the law enforcement realm to talk about how do we support those individuals who are an inordinate or disproportionately impacted by the crime in our communities.
And I'll just follow up with that. And this is not an excuse, it's a reality. We have seen, and nobody would have ever guessed this 6 years ago when I started, I didn't, but we have an epidemic proportion in heroin sales right now. And it is not the culture that you would think. Heroin exceeds every income level, every socioeconomic level, it exceeds everything, and it's at epidemic proportions right now. And that is having an impact on everything in every city, in every suburb in America. The sad part about it is when we find solutions, like Tom said, he saw this drop in homicides. When we find solutions, oftentimes people go, you're doing great, we'll defund you. And I actually saw that. We were getting at our gangs so successfully that our own congressman cut out the additional funding to finish the job. And I said, what in the world are you thinking? Well, it's an earmark. I said, an earmark? My Lord, it's 5 jurisdictions that have come together to work together to battle gangs. So we have this situation where we are always on the street working these issues, and the poverty is relational. I mean, it is. Opportunity is relational. We have been blessed in Racine, and I'm going to say that, and I'm going to knock on wood because you never know. We're at a 50-year low in crime right now. We've had 1 homicide in the last 14 months. And you know what? I had a woman that came down to do a story on Racine, and she's a reporter, and the first thing she said to me is, I was terrified to come here. Perception is the reality.
That's it.
We could have no homicides, and yet everybody would say, this is the scariest place in America.
Yes, sir, way in back.
Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
So I just wanted to touch on what Tom Barrett said earlier about how Milwaukee's changed and like the energy in the downtown area. And one thing, like I guess a millennial, I didn't know that was a term until a year ago. But I see that too, just in the short time that I've been here. And one thing that I see is a dynamic that happens as people get older. They grow up wherever they grow up, and then when they're young, they don't really care about a lot of the family values as much. So they can move into a city for the attractions, the tourism, the culture, the energy. But one thing that happens once they get to the age that they want to have kids, a lot of people that have the opportunity, they move out into the suburbs. So, I consider my generation to be like the baby boomer rebound. And, at this time we're moving into the city for that energy, but what's going to keep us here? What's going to keep us in the core urban areas, reinvigorating development, bringing life back into the center of cities? I see problems with NPS in Milwaukee, and then from there moving into the next stage of educational achievement, those low-end jobs. What's going to keep people in the city? What's going to make it a place where you want to move to, and you feel safe for your kids to stay there, and you could have a great life in the urban area throughout your life?
Well, I think that we all go through chapters in our lives, and I would say for young people, having a backyard is not a big deal. When you're 20 years old, A backyard is not a big deal. When you're 25, when you're 30. When you're 35 and you've got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, all of a sudden a backyard is a big deal. Or a playground close by or a park close by. So I'm not naive to think that this great, wonderful influx of 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds or 30-year-olds are going to stay there when they've got 5 kids in that apartment. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. They're going to move. They're going to move, and that's life. I think the challenge that you're alluding to, which is a very real challenge, is we cannot have the education system continue to be the reason someone leaves a city. Right. And that is a real issue. That is a real issue because people they're going to live where they believe their children are going to get a good education. That's why I think it's important for us to focus on urban education and to have, right in downtown Milwaukee, or just north of downtown Milwaukee, you've got Golda Meir School, which is a phenomenally good school, We need more Golda Meirs. We need more Ronald Reagan high schools. We need more Rufus King high schools. We need more Spanish, French, German, Italian immersion schools that will make this attractive. But we also have to make sure that the schools that are for the low-income kids, that they're receiving it too, because they have to get out. So the education is, as much as the gentleman here referred to crime as the 800-pound gorilla, education is another 800-pound gorilla.
Time for one more question. Sister.
I'd like to apologize for interrupting, but every one of you began with an example that was stymied because the public didn't support you in it. So sometimes I think the elephant in the room is the media. I know it's being naive, but how can, and this is a terrible example, how is it that the NRA can turn every situation to their advantage, which they've done recently with all the things that have happened around the country, with the shootings? They still have convinced people they need those guns.
Guns. Yeah, and I got to tell you, I was giving a speech at a group because I know Tom and I are, I'm not sure about Karen, but she probably is, but we're part of the group Mayors Against Illegal Guns. Yeah. I think that's important to recognize the word illegal guns. So I'm giving this speech, and I said, at what point, I got a little caffeinated, and I said, at what point are we going to come out and actually get Congress to do this? What is it going to take? Is it going to take for a congressperson to get shot? And then all of a sudden I realized that happened.
It did happen.
Gabby Giffords was shot. And they're still doing nothing about it. And they're actually arguing with us about supporting a proposal that says we should take illegal guns off the streets. So when we go back to the crime issue on what we're dealing with, we can't even get Congress to work with us on illegal guns. Now, this last guy, as I understand it, had mental health issues and was still able to get a gun. So you can't go to a theater, you can't go to a church, you can't go to a grocery store, you can't go home, you can't go down the street, you can't go to a park. Is there any place that you can tell me where I can go and actually be safe?
Well, I'll help you out here, John, because when the state repealed the 48-hour waiting period, one of the proponents said, well, I think women should have guns to protect themselves from their husbands.
Can't go home.
I'm thinking, wow, what a great way to start a relationship. But I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's just that, when you look at what we're facing, it really, you sit there and you just shake your head and you go, is at any point are these folks in the state and federal level going to seriously get out of Washington and Madison, come home, go to their grocery store and start talking to people? Because if they ever did, they would realize that they're really wasting our time and money. And I'd like to actually see them spend a day in our job because their head would explode. And it would explode is because they cannot comprehend the sheer volume of things that we're trying to deal with that we're getting no support for. And it's frustrating, sister.
I think they will move, sister, when they fear the collective voice of those like us in this room more than they fear the dollars that are placed against them by the NRA and similar organizations.
Well, we'll have to end it with that.
Let Tom get one more.
People say, why haven't we risen up in rage against what's going on? Where's the rage in the citizens?
Give me one minute, because I want to know what's to cut it off. But I would push back. I don't think it's the dollars. I don't think it's the dollars. I think what happens is you have an urban area, and gun violence is an issue. We talked about that. Our collective question should be, when I talked about those 3 teenagers that were killed, where did those kids get those guns? Where did they were all shot by teenagers. And you want the media, I want the media to be all over this. I want the media to be all, where are these guns coming from? Because what's happened at the federal level is they've made it more and more difficult for us to find out where the guns are coming from. Because of the ability to do that. So there's a cultural difference, because in some parts of this country, some parts of this state, some parts of Indiana, some parts of Illinois, when someone yells duck, you duck. Other parts of the state, when someone yells duck, you grab the rifle and shoot the duck. And that doesn't mean they're just different worlds. They're different worlds. The same word means something totally different. And some politicians are very skilled at making that wedge larger and larger and larger. So I'll cut myself off there.
Well, thank you very much. Let's leave it there, and let's thank our panelists, Mayor Karen Freeman Wilson of Gary, John Dickert of Racine, and Tom Baird of Milwaukee.
Good job, John. Karen? Good job.
So with the benefit of experience, I advertise these even on the program as brief concluding remarks, and they will be. I have already thanked my fellow conference organizers and our patrons, so it remains to thank 2 groups. One is all the panelists. Mayor Karen Freeman Wilson gets the award this morning from having traversed the Dan Ryan, Kennedy, and Edens expressways. A number of the other panelists came from outside Milwaukee as well, and we are grateful to every participant for not just spending time here today, but also in preparing for the conference. The other thank you is to all of you for your continuing interest in this topic and our programs more generally, both those of Marquette Law School and those of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. There will be more, including more together. And in the meantime, I invite you to read the results of this latest Marquette Law School poll online at law.marquette.edu/poll. As Charles Franklin noted, this is the first time that we've polled outside the state of Wisconsin. The results are quite interesting. On that page, you will also find Professor Franklin's masterful report with all of the graphs and charts from this morning, and more of that as well as analysis. It's well worth a read. So, in short, many thanks to all.